I was vacationing with my family out in Vancouver when I got the call a week ago. I had been sitting on our hotel room's balcony overlooking the city when I suddenly felt my phone buzz. "Jameson here," I said upon answering the call. "Jamie, it's Dylan," my boss replied with a way too chipper tone. "How's the weather out there?" I sighed, catching on immediately that this might not be just a call to check in, and inquired, "Something tells me that you want to know how soon I can get back to work, right?" "I wish it was that simple, Jamie." Dylan let out an exasperated sigh. "You recall how we were discussing the great whites starting to show up in the harbor, right?" "Yeah, what about it?" "We've just recently had a few attacks." His voice rang out through the phone speaker. 10 deaths have been confirmed, 3 of them last night alone. I was initially gonna wait until tomorrow when you and your wife got home, but with how serious things are getting, I need all hands on deck. Alright, she won't be too happy with me leaving her and her parents a day early, but she's been pretty understanding. I sighed, wondering how I was going to bring it up to them. I'll be on the next flight to Halifax as soon as possible. Not long after the call ended, I brought up the news to my wife and in-laws, and with the knowledge that she'd be home the next day, was on a flight to Halifax and arrived home a few hours later. The very next day as I was driving to work, I curiously noted that there was a weather advisory about weather conditions hinting at a possible hurricane in the near future. This caught my attention since Halifax hadn't had a hurricane since Juan, a Category 2 hurricane, hit the Atlantic coast in 2003. Nevertheless, I made sure to take caution, having occasionally worked in international waters and understanding that this weather advisory could make the upcoming investigation difficult. If there's one thing I've learned with my career and my family history of serving in the Navy, the ocean is a mysterious and dangerous place that you should never underestimate. For a single mistake out there can cause casualties. I wasn't all too surprised to see the familiar fire, police, and ambulance lights as I parked in the Rainbow Beach parking lot and headed towards the beach. Not too long after, I could see Dylan talking to the paramedics, his trademark fishing hat and handlebar mustache making him stand out among the sea of Coast Guard officers, all in uniform and chattering quietly while awaiting instructions. "There's our marine biologist, folks." I could hear my boss call out and saw him wave me over as I approached. "Alrighty, now that's everyone's all here, let's begin." After we were debriefed on the situation, everyone went their separate ways with a few officers helping the lifeguards change the flags to red ones to indicate to the public that the beach was closed. A few more along with police officers were putting up caution tape, fully blocking off the beach. Meanwhile, I had followed Dylan along with a police officer and a paramedic to a particular spot as he turned to me to say, "We just found another body, a college student in his early 20s. He'd actually been missing for a week now, and his corpse washed up to shore an hour ago." Not long after he said this, we had reached our destination and I could see the corpse in question, or rather what was left of it, lying alongside what used to be a yacht. I nearly gagged, the putrid smell of something that's been deceased for a week invading my nostrils. Pushing through the stench, I knelt down to start my part of the investigation. I could tell that there were signs of animals eating away at the corpse over the course of the week the young man had gone missing, but there were 2 things that stood out, and I feel will haunt my nightmares for a few weeks. The first being his eyes, glazed over but holding a look of terror in them. The second was what was most likely the fatal injury itself, a rather large bite mark in the young man's torso, large enough to the point that his left leg was barely attached to his body. I frowned, noticing immediately that something about the bite mark didn't seem right. "Something wrong, Jamie?" Dylan asked, his eyebrows furrowed in concern. "You see the size of this, right?" I inquired back, pointing at the wound. "The bite radius seems a little too big to be your average great white, or any shark in general." "It does look pretty big, true," the older gentleman noted upon closer inspection. "To be fair, there have been a few occasions where a great white can be measured up to 19 feet in length, so we can't entirely rule one out. Plus, orcas can get up to a similar length too, if you're thinking this isn't a shark." I don't know, sir. Great white attacks usually only happen 10 times a year, so finding 11 bodies over the course of a week is a bit strange, I replied as I pulled out my measuring tape to properly measure the wound, being silent for a moment before I continued. Not to mention, as you recall, I've been in this field for 17 years, sir. Judging by the radius, whatever man-eater we've got, what was the nickname you gave for whatever this is again? Bruce. I thought it was fitting. I'm not surprised, I sighed. Well, whatever Bruce is, my guess is they're at least 20 feet in length, possibly bigger than that. Alrighty then, Jamie, Dylan declared, patting me on the shoulder. Make sure you note down your findings and then get ready to board one of the boats. Stay safe out there. I gave a nod as the old man walked away, but as I prepared to pull out my notebook, something shiny caught my eye. Looking back at the body, I saw something clenched tightly in the victim's hand. At first I thought it might have been a knife or a piece of the wrecked yacht. Barely managing to pry it from his fingers without damaging his body, I realized that this wasn't a piece of metal at all. What I now held and took a moment to examine appeared to be a large, aquamarine scale, roughly the size of a license plate. Upon recognizing what it was, I pulled out my notebook on identifying marine life and flipped through it to try to match it with anything in the book. The closest I could get, however, was being able to note that it looked similar in shape to that of a coral snake. As I placed the scale in one of the evidence bags we had, I felt a sense of concern and knew I had to reach out online to any marine biologists. And I picked here because something was definitely off with that scale. I know for a fact that coral snakes aren't that color, and they certainly aren't anywhere the size of whatever killed these people. Ow, fuck, I yelped suddenly, nearly dropping the now bloodied scale that in my foolishness wasn't paying attention to while putting it in the evidence bag and had just cut my hand on. Dropping it fully into the bag and thinking quickly, I made sure to stop the bleeding from the fresh wound before cleaning it as best as I could and bandaging it tightly. I gotta get someone to check that to make sure it doesn't get infected, I muttered to myself as I stood up with my stuff collected. Well, as carefully as someone with a bandaged hand can. It was just then that the sky opened up and it began to rain. I saw the paramedics heading over with a body bag and figured that I should head out, when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination or not, but I could swear I saw a glimpse of something out in the harbor. Curious, I grabbed out my binoculars and looked out towards the ocean, and what I saw filled me with a sense of dread. At first, it looked like a large sailboat cutting through the harbor, but something seemed a little off. It took me a moment to realize that the boat was heading out more towards the open ocean, whereas the wind was currently flowing away from the shore and pelting me in the face. Not to mention it was moving in ways that should be impossible for a boat. And it suddenly dawned on me that it wasn't a sailboat at all, but in fact a rather large series of spines making a sail-like fin. It was a pale blue-white, almost translucent, and the part that terrified me the most was its size. This fin looked like a rather large moving island in the distance, way too big to be a shark or whale. And then it was gone. As swiftly as I saw it, the fin descended back into the seawater. There was another thing I noticed too, somehow stranger than seeing the fin. I didn't hear them at first, since it was subtle, but I've started to hear a voice in my head. It's androgynous, and in a language I don't recognize yet I somehow understand. It's weirdly soothing, calling out to me even longer after I've left the beach, trying to coax me towards the water. I don't know what that's all about, but I didn't hear it until after I cut my hand on the scale. I think I may need to look into this more. Whatever the case, I figured that if there's anywhere I can seek answers for what I saw, it's here. If what I saw is the man-eater my boss is calling Bruce, then I don't think it's a great white that we're dealing with. And the thought of that scares me. Apologies for taking a while to get back to everyone. I've been waiting patiently for our vessel's hotspot to be set up. Now, on to the update. The following morning, after we had started the investigation, we were all separated into teams of 15 people per boat. Leading the charge was Dylan's boat, the CCGS Amity, a fishing vessel approximately 40 feet in length, painted in the telltale colors of the Canadian Coast Guard. The Amity had been Dylan's pride and joy, proudly serving the country for 30 years, and yet it was so well maintained that it still looked fresh off the shipyard. On board, the crew consisted of myself, Dylan, my wife Ellen, a marine paleontologist, who among seeing the scale I had cut myself on, immediately volunteered to assist with the case however she could, Matt, a local news reporter on board to report our findings, Lawrence, a representative of Halifax City Hall sent with us upon request by the mayor, and 10 others consisting of the Amity's crew. While we were quite a mix of ethnicity and cultures, my wife Ellen always caught plenty of attention, a beautiful New Zealander woman of half Maori descent. Ellen's kindness and sharp wit is always capable of making the hearts of everyone of every gender flutter with joy. Unfortunately, this seemed to draw the ire of Lawrence, a well-known skeptic of the paranormal who had the reputation of being a devout Catholic and an unpleasant bigot. It also didn't help that Lawrence, himself a pale Caucasian man, paler than myself, and I'm fairly pale, with the build and charm of a walking skeleton, frequently argued with several government higher-ups, including Dylan, about, and I quote, letting a pair of illegal, insert homophobic slur here, hold positions of power. Granted, I don't necessarily think that someone's ethnicity and who they love should matter when you're trying to hunt a man-eater, but that didn't stop Lawrence and Ellen from immediately butting heads. You two seriously expect the mayor to believe this to me more than just a rusted-over license plate? Lawrence's cold voice cut out through the quiet sounds of rolling waves as he glanced over the mysterious scale in the evidence bag between him and Ellen. This rusted-over license plate, as you'd so much like it to be, Ellen interjected with a bristle of annoyance, is indeed a scale according to my research. And according to my research, that scale dates back to over 1 million years old. Now, unless you can somehow prove that the ancestors of Homo sapiens were building cars that long ago, quit questioning my work already. Well, maybe you should respect a little bit of fact-checking, young lady. The representative countered through his teeth, though before the argument could continue, Dylan decided to intervene. Oi, there won't be any more childish bickering on my ship, my boss shouted from the bow of the vessel. We've got an important job to do. If you ain't gonna focus on our job and continue ripping at each other's throats, I'll send you both home. Lawrence took a moment to gather his bearings, clearly not used to being talked back to, before he said, "Don't you think we should have someone more qualified than these two?" "You're looking to be thrown overboard with that attitude, Larry," the captain growled back in return. "Ellen and Jamie are far more qualified for their part than you and I, so don't be acting jealous that a couple of lovely lasses know more about the sea than you." At this point, while Lawrence was muttering some rather not nice words under his breath, Matt leaned towards me and politely inquired, "Just how often does this happen?" "Too often to count," I replied earnestly, and then brought up my own question, "How's your stomach holding up?" The bespectacled man winced, remembering how a few hours before he had been rather seasick as he said, "Much better, thanks to the medicine you gave me for it, thank you." There proceeded to be a variety of different conversations among everyone on board, and before long, the Amity had reached the approximate spot on the water that a family of great whites were recently spotted. Coincidentally enough, this was also near where I had seen the fin cutting through the water. I had also been out here weeks before with Dylan, tagging some of the sharks to track their movements. He had explained at some point on our way here that he wanted to check on the family since the data we had collected on them seemed off. "So, why again are we looking to find a family of sharks?" Matt piped up as we reached our destination. "The data we've received from their tags is showing that they're behaving erratically," Dylan curtly replied as members of his crew started working to bring something up from below deck. "We're giving them a welfare check to figure out what's going on. If one or more of them end up being Bruce, or if Bruce is causing them to react the way they've been, we'll know with a closer look." "What do you mean by a closer look?" Lawrence asked, his eyes lighting up in surprise when the object being pulled up, a shark cage, finally came into view. "You mean to tell me you fucking send people down in shark-infested waters in that thing?" "How do you think we tagged them?" I interjected, taking a moment to stretch before heading away from the cage. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm heading to my quarters to change. I'll be back." A few minutes later, I returned, having traded out my uniform for a wetsuit and a waterproof walkie-talkie, earning a raised eyebrow from Matt and Lawrence. "You're sending her down there in the cage," Lawrence grumbled, his judgmental eyes glaring in annoyance. Without scuba gear, Matt continued, his eyes filled with concern and curiosity. Dylan walked over to me and, with a pat on my shoulder, said, "Out of my whole crew, Jamie's got quite a few, shall we say tricks up her sleeve that makes her perfect for going in the shark cage. She earned the code name Siren for a reason. In fact, I guess you could say that she's like a fish in the water." I rolled my eyes at his joke, a consistent running gag among the crew, about the circumstances of my early years being odd and not quite human. I mean, to be fair, the jokes weren't entirely wrong. Dylan and I are both aware of that. As I climbed into the cage, I began to reminisce on how me and Dylan met all those years ago, long before I began my career. I was 6 years old when my birth parents were killed in a shipwreck off the coast of Nova Scotia, not quite old enough to remember the circumstances of the wreck, or how long I'd been floating in the water alone, but old enough to remember the kind man in his mid-20s pulling me out of the water and resuscitating me with the help of his 7-year-old niece. It was clear to people right away that I wasn't exactly your average kid, since after all, your average 6-year-old doesn't sprout gills and webbed fingers and have their legs turn into a tail when placed in a body of water, so growing up turned out to be quite unpleasant to say the least. I got passed between several foster homes, each one a variety of good and bad, and all throughout my school years couldn't escape the relentless teasing and references to a particular cartoon movie from the 90s. Thankfully for me, I came to acknowledge that I did still have someone in my corner, the very man who had rescued me from drowning, who let me stay with him and his family in between homes, who could have relied on good old nepotism to give me a job in the Coast Guard, but rather encouraged me to get to my current position in my field the old-fashioned way. The same man, my boss Dylan, who 7 years ago had also encouraged me to ask his niece, my now wife, out on our first date. I was smiling thinking back on this as the cage lowered towards the water, taking a moment to look back up on deck as the others looked on. As soon as half of my body was submerged, I could see Lawrence and Matt's eyes widen in shock while I felt the familiar changes occurring at the same time. "The actual fuck, I thought you meant the fish thing as a figure of speech," I heard the representative stammer in surprise. While I'd love to say what Dylan's likely response was, by the time he was about to speak, the cage was fully submerged in the water, leaving me to myself in the tranquility of the North Atlantic. After a few minutes of descending in silence, I pulled out the walkie-talkie and switched it on right to get greeted by Matt's voice saying, "Come in, Jamie, this is the Amity, over." "Roger that, Matt," I replied with a smirk as I began scouting for the family of great whites. "Hope I didn't give you a heart attack, over." "Well, at the least we know that Siren is more than just a code name," the news reporter joked. "I'll be sure to not add that bit of information in the report, though maybe I should add in something about how much Larry's flipping out over certain revelations." Sure enough, over the sounds of the ocean, I could hear the sounds of Lawrence blabbering on about the existence of fish people in the background of the boat's side of the communication. Soon enough, I heard the sound of the walkie-talkie exchanging hands as Dylan took over communications on their end. "Alrighty, Jameson, have you seen anything yet?" Dylan inquired gruffly. "Not quite, honestly," I stated, as I noted how there didn't seem to be any sign of the sharks at that very moment, let alone any sign of marine life. "Have you seen any movement from the tags on the sonar?" There was a moment of silence before my boss replied, "Actually, strangely enough, I can't seem to locate them on the sonar at all. Let me know if you find anything." "Roger that, maintaining radio silence for now," I declared, switching off the walkie as I swam gently around the edges of the cage, hoping to get a better view of the ocean around me. Just as it was quiet, however, I heard the voice again. It was a lot clearer this time around, since now I was in the water, and with that, I was able to identify that it sounded less androgynous and more feminine now. Whereas before it was trying to guide me to the water, now it seemed to be trying to get my attention. "I know you can hear me," the mysterious voice echoed in my mind, but I tried my best to ignore it. Despite my best efforts, I hadn't been able to get help identifying the origins of the voice or if it was even real. To be frank, it had become less scary and more of a nuisance over the past few days. "You can hear me, don't deny it," the voice grumbled in what sounded like irritation. "I don't know what the fuck you are, but as far as I'm aware you're just a figment of my imagination." I finally decided to reply back to the voice. "Ugh. Can't you stay quiet for 5 minutes? I'm a little too busy to deal with your esoteric bullshit right now." Much to my surprise, my mysterious mind companion answered back with quite the bite to their words and something I didn't entirely expect. "You don't have to be so rude, young child of the seas. I'm trying to help you. Look underneath you." Deciding to humor its advice, I glanced down towards the bottom of the shark cage, expecting nothing. However, something was indeed there that caught my attention. It appeared to be the shape of the sharks we were looking for, but something seemed a bit off. Radioing back in, I said, "Siren to Amity, I think I see something. Can you lower the cage down about 1 knot from the water's surface?" "Roger that, Jamie, over and out," my boss replied, and before long I could see the shark cage lowering down further into the dark depths of the ocean. Making sure to swim down along with it, my eyes began to adjust as I went deeper and deeper down towards the shapes in the water. As I got closer, it occurred to me that the shapes weren't moving at all, and, much to my absolute horror, it soon became clear why. "Hey boss," I barely managed to radio out, shaking in a mix of horror and pain. "The shark family, I found them. They're all dead." "Wait, what?" His voice echoed out in the murky waters. "You're serious?" I wouldn't joke about something like this, sir. You know that," I stammered out, choking on tears. "They're all accounted for, all 5 of them / it looks like they were attacked by something big." The sight of those bodies down there isn't something that I'm willing to describe in full, but having worked on cases involving great white sharks before and coming to appreciate a species that's deemed vulnerable, seeing an entire family of them being alive the week before only to find them dead now is devastating. Even as I'm typing this part up now, thinking back to this still brings me to tears at the loss of life. Holding back my anguish for later, I began to examine the corpses, only for my blood to run cold the moment I noticed something and immediately radioed in. "Siren to Amity, we've got another problem," I worriedly radioed in, keeping my eyes out on the water. "The tags are gone. Whatever killed them, it ripped off their dorsal fins. Have you been able to relocate them yet?" "I'm checking the sonar now," Dylan replied, and I could hear him moving around all the while the mysterious voice seemed to be desperately trying to get my attention again, only for him to call out, "They're being picked up on the sonar again. Crap. If that's Bruce that killed those sharks, then it's currently 50 feet down from your location. It's headed your way, and it's moving fast." Just then, several fish swam frantically right past the cage, as if they were fleeing from something, and it soon became apparent what that something was, since almost immediately I could see a rather large shadow moving beneath me. With how dark it was, I could barely make out what appeared to be a rolling mass of coils several kilometers in length, and a pair of large, ocean green eyes with serpentine pupils staring right back at me. Sure enough, the shape was approaching rapidly, way too fast for comfort. "Shit, pull me up now, pull me up now," I shouted into the walkie-talkie right as the mysterious voice in my head was telling me to run. The cage began to ascend as fast as it could, but much to my dismay the beast was gaining on me. While I still couldn't see it, I could make out its enormous jaws opening wide to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth the size of my forearm. Just as the seas began to slowly lighten up, those same jaws proceeded to clamp down on the shark cage and started to violently shake it. Through the water I could make out the sounds of creaking as the Amity's crane was desperately fighting to bring the cage back on board and the sounds of the shark cage straining to stay in one piece. All the while up close and personal, I could hear the sounds of growling and hissing coming from the beast that I was now certain was the man-eater we were looking for, and now it was clearly trying to make me its next victim. Thinking quickly, I swam towards the door of the cage and reached through the bars to grab the door latch and began to pry it open. It only took 10 seconds to get it open, but those 10 seconds felt like the longest 10 in my life. Each second I knew could have been my last, with Bruce's jaws closing further and further on the cage, causing serious dents in it. Just as the cage really began to crumble, I finally got the door open and swam out just in time, the beast's teeth just barely missing my tail. Moving quickly, I headed for the surface while Bruce was distracted trying to remove the pieces of what was left of the cage from its teeth, dark blood leaking from where the cage had clearly cut its mouth. Very soon I had breached the surface of the ocean and was quickly pulled out and onto a now very shaky Amity. The crew were desperately trying to pull the cage's remains back up from the depths, but were having a hard time. As soon as I had the chance, I rushed over to help, only to be stopped by a sudden lurch. The sound of snapping could be heard as the crane's steel rope proceeded to snap right in half. While the half attached to the shark cage was swiftly pulled into the depths, the other half went careening backwards into the air with the crane, sending the Amity into an almost vertical incline. It just barely managed to level out without breaking apart. However, it became clear right away that trouble was only just beginning. "Men overboard," Dylan cried out, as sure enough, 2 members of the crew had been thrown in the water. As the crew rushed to grab rope to save them, it unfortunately became clear that we were already too late, for Bruce was already upon them. Within seconds, the surrounding area was filled with screams of terror as we were unable to do anything but watch in horror as our crewmates were dragged under the waves until there was nothing left to indicate they had been there, save for the sheer amount of blood left in their absence. The most we could do now is report their deaths, which is what we did. We couldn't tell their family the exact details about the thing that killed them, since we didn't even get a proper look at it. Even then, it's not anyone we know will believe us without proper proof. And now, we're all left scared, with more questions than answers. As far as we're aware now, it's 2 major things. For one, the mysterious voice, wherever it's coming from, doesn't seem to be a threat to us. However, we still haven't identified where it comes from, and why I'm the only one that can hear it. And even if benevolent, it worries me that I don't know its intentions with me. As for Bruce, it hasn't attacked since the shark cage incident, but that doesn't mean we don't know where it is. It's still appearing on the sonar, stalking the Amity from a safe distance, though since it seemed quite injured from the cage, I'm not sure whether it's for our safety or its own. Not to mention that now all of us have occasionally seen its fin poking out of the way a distance away, not staying above water for long. All in all, this is going down as one of the scariest cases I've worked on with the Canadian Coast Guard. Heck, even as I'm typing this out, I'm still shaking. Right now I can see Bruce through the porthole in my quarters, and I'm terrified at the thought of when it'll strike next. The sea was a vast, black canvas under the starlit sky, where every ripple seemed to whisper ancient secrets. It was here, in the uncharted depths, that an old legend spoke of a creature so monstrous it could swallow ships whole. A predator from a bygone era, the megalodon, long thought extinct. But in the dark recesses of the ocean, the truth is rarely what it seems. Dr. Emily Carter had always been fascinated by the ocean's mysteries. As a marine biologist specializing in extinct species, she had spent years studying the megalodon, the massive shark that had terrorized the seas millions of years ago, with new evidence suggesting the possibility of a surviving population in a remote trench. She and her team were on the brink of a groundbreaking discovery. The Endeavour, a state-of-the-art research submarine, descended slowly into the abyssal darkness of the Mariana Trench. Inside, Emily, her colleague Dr. Mark Harris, and a small crew prepared for what was to be a historic dive. "Just remember," Emily said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the submersible's engines. "This is uncharted territory. If we find what we think we might, it's going to change everything." Mark nodded, his face illuminated by the glow of the instruments. "I know. I just hope we're prepared for whatever we might encounter." As the submersible plunged deeper, the sunlight disappeared, replaced by the cold, eerie blue of the deep ocean. Hours passed, and the crew remained focused on their instruments and monitors. They were reaching the edge of the known world, where light could no longer pierce the suffocating darkness. The trench was a forbidding place, its walls steep and jagged, a labyrinth of shadow and silence. The Endeavour's floodlights cast narrow beams into the void, revealing strange, bioluminescent creatures and eerie, distorted forms. "Look at that," Mark said, pointing to a shadowy figure that darted away as they approached. "Never seen anything like it." Emily peered at the monitor, her heart racing. The shape was fleeting, but it was unmistakably large. Could it be one of the legendary creatures? As the submersible drifted through the trench, the floodlights flickered. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier excitement now tinged with apprehension. A deep, rumbling sound echoed through the water, making the Endeavour shudder. Emily glanced at the sonar screen, where a massive, blip-like shape was approaching them, her breath caught in her throat. "Mark, are you seeing this?" Mark's eyes widened as he scrutinized the readout. "It's enormous. Whatever it is, it's getting closer." The rumbling intensified, and the lights dimmed, almost as if the very darkness of the trench was pressing in on them. Suddenly, the submersible was rocked by a tremendous impact. The lights went out, plunging them into an impenetrable blackness. The Endeavour's emergency lights flickered back on, revealing a fractured, cracked view of the trench walls. Panic set in as the crew scrambled to assess the damage. "What was that?" Emily shouted over the din. "We're not sure," Mark replied, checking the instruments, "but we're not alone down here." The sonar readout showed the massive shape still circling them, growing ever closer. The crew's attempts to regain control were futile. The submersible was immobilized, trapped in the trench's icy grip. As the hours dragged on, the crew's unease turned into terror. Strange noises echoed through the metal hull, a low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate from all directions. The shadowy figure on the sonar was now a menacing presence, its size and power evident in every tremor. Emily's hands shook as she peered out of the observation window. The darkness outside seemed to writhe and twist, as if something colossal was moving just beyond their sight. "Whatever it is, it's toying with us," Mark said, his voice tight with fear. "We need to find a way out of here." The submersible's lights revealed a glimpse of the creature outside, a gargantuan, prehistoric shark, its scales glistening with an otherworldly sheen. The megalodon had returned from the depths of time, a predator as ancient as the ocean itself. The megalodon circled the Endeavour with a predatory grace, its enormous jaws snapping with an echoing clang. The crew's fear mounted as they realized the full extent of their predicament. The creature's sheer size made escape seem impossible. "There's no way we can outmaneuver it," Emily said, desperation creeping into her voice. "We have to find a way to get back to the surface." Mark's fingers flew over the controls, trying to restart the engines, but the submersible remained dead in the water. The megalodon seemed to sense their helplessness, its attacks growing more relentless. The submersible was rocked by another violent impact, sending a wave of panic through the crew. Water began to seep into the hull, and the lights flickered once more. As the megalodon closed in for the kill, the crew's situation became increasingly dire. Emily and Mark worked frantically to repair the submersible, their efforts growing increasingly desperate as the creature's attacks grew more violent. "Emily, we need to get out of here now," Mark shouted, his face pale with fear. Emily nodded, determination hardening in her eyes. "We have to try. We can't let it end like this." With a final, desperate effort, Mark managed to restart the engines. The Endeavour lurched forward, its lights blazing into the darkness as they began their ascent. The megalodon roared in frustration, its massive form slamming against the submersible one last time before it retreated into the shadows. The crew clung to their seats, their hearts pounding as the Endeavour raced toward the surface. The Endeavour broke through the surface, the crew gasping for breath as the sunlight bathed them in its warmth. They had survived the encounter with the megalodon, but the experience had left them scarred. As they made their way back to shore, Emily looked back at the ocean, a mixture of awe and terror in her eyes. The megalodon was still out there, lurking in the depths, a reminder of the ocean's untamed, ancient power. The sea was vast and full of secrets, and some mysteries were best left undisturbed. Back on land, the ordeal left Emily and her team physically and emotionally exhausted. The Endeavour was in disrepair, its once imposing exterior now scarred from the megalodon. Relentless attacks. They were met with a mixture of disbelief and skepticism from the scientific community when they recounted their harrowing experience. In a debriefing with government officials and marine researchers, Emily and Mark struggled to convey the gravity of what they had witnessed. The evidence was compelling but still incomplete. The damaged submersible and the partial sonar data were all they had to substantiate their claims. "We need more than just your word and a few fragmented images," Dr. Leonard Graves, a prominent marine biologist, said with a dismissive tone. "The idea of a megalodon surviving in the modern ocean is far-fetched." Emily clenched her jaw, feeling a mix of frustration and determination. "I understand your skepticism, but we were there. The creature is real. We saw it, and it nearly killed us." Graves raised an eyebrow. "If it's real, why hasn't there been any other evidence?" Mark interjected. "We were in the trench for a reason. It's one of the least explored and most treacherous places on Earth. The megalodon is adapting to its environment in ways we can barely comprehend." Despite the skepticism, the government agreed to provide funding for further exploration. Emily and her team were granted a small, renewed research grant, but they knew it was only a matter of time before someone else attempted to verify or debunk their findings. Several months passed and the psychological scars of the encounter lingered. Emily's nights were plagued by nightmares of the massive jaws closing in on them, while Mark struggled with flashbacks of the creature's growl reverberating through the submersible. Despite the trauma, Emily and Mark continued their research, focusing on gathering more evidence of the megalodon existence. They planned another expedition, this time with better equipment and a larger team. Their goal was to venture deeper into the trench and capture more conclusive proof of the creature. The new mission was fraught with tension and excitement. As the team prepared to set sail, they were accompanied by a mix of seasoned researchers and eager young scientists. Among them was Dr. Sarah Lane, a marine ecologist with a reputation for her tenacity and innovation. "Are you sure you want to do this again?" Sarah asked Emily as they reviewed the plans for the new dive. "After everything that happened, it sounds risky." Emily met her gaze steadily. "We have to know the truth. If the megalodon is out there, we need to understand it. And if we can bring back definitive evidence, it will change everything." As the expedition embarked on its journey, the crew was both excited and apprehensive. They were equipped with advanced technology, including a new submersible designed to withstand greater pressures and more sophisticated sonar systems to detect large, moving objects. The submersible, dubbed Abyssal Explorer, began its descent into the Mariana Trench. The team monitored their instruments closely, their eyes scanning for any sign of the megalodon or other anomalies. The trench's darkness enveloped them once more, but this time, the crew was better prepared. They navigated through the chasms and crevices with greater confidence, their advanced sensors providing clearer readings. As they reached the depths where the previous encounter had occurred, a familiar unease settled over the team. The floodlights cut through the inky blackness, revealing strange, luminescent creatures and eerie formations. Then, just as they were beginning to think the megalodon might have moved on, the sonar detected a massive shape approaching. The crew held their breath, their earlier fears resurfacing with a vengeance. The megalodon appeared on the monitor, its massive bulk even more intimidating than before. It circled the submersible with a predatory patience, its presence a dark omen of what was to come. The Abyssal Explorer was once again subjected to the relentless assaults of the megalodon. The creature's strength and sheer size seemed to have grown even more formidable. The submersible's reinforced hull groaned under the pressure of the impacts. "Hold on," Emily shouted as the submersible was rocked by another violent hit. The crew worked frantically to maintain control, their faces etched with fear. The megalodon attacks were more calculated this time. It seemed to understand the submersible's weaknesses and exploited them with ruthless efficiency. The Abyssal Explorer's lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced across the trench walls. "We need to get out of here," Mark yelled, but the submersible was already straining to move. The creature's massive jaws snapped close to the hull, its growls resonating through the vessel. The crew scrambled to repair damaged systems, their hands shaking as they worked. Emily knew they had to find a way to escape, but the megalodon was relentless, its patience unnerving. As the situation grew increasingly desperate, Sarah suggested using a powerful underwater drone to distract the megalodon and create a path for their escape. The drone was equipped with a high-intensity light and sound system designed to attract and confuse predators. With a final, daring plan in motion, the drone was released and moved toward the megalodon. The creature, intrigued by the new stimulus, followed the drone, allowing the Abyssal Explorer to make a swift but precarious ascent. The Abyssal Explorer raced toward the surface, the crew's tension palpable as they navigated the treacherous ascent. The megalodon, momentarily distracted by the drone, followed the lure but did not give up easily. Emily watched the depth gauge with bated breath as they climbed. Each second felt like an eternity. The lights of the submersible flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows on the walls of the trench. Finally, as they neared the surface, the pressure began to ease, and the megalodon pursuit slowed. The creature roared in frustration but could not reach them through the expanding depths. With a final burst of speed, the Abyssal Explorer broke through the surface, the crew gasping in relief as they emerged into the warm embrace of the open sea. The drone, still functioning, was retrieved, and the megalodon was nowhere in sight. Back on land, the team was hailed as heroes. Their evidence was irrefutable, and the discovery of the megalodon, alive and thriving, sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The images and data collected during the dives offered new insights into the creature's behavior and adaptations. Yet, the experience had left its mark on Emily and her team. The ocean, once a place of wonder and discovery, had become a symbol of fear and the unknown. The megalodon, a relic of the past, was a reminder of the ocean's vast and mysterious depths where ancient predators still lurked in the shadows. Emily stood on the shore, gazing out at the expanse of water that stretched to the horizon. The sea was both beautiful and terrifying, its secrets still waiting to be uncovered. The megalodon was a testament to the mysteries that lay hidden beneath the surface, a reminder that some parts of the world were meant to remain unexplored. As the sun set and the ocean darkened, Emily felt a mixture of awe and trepidation. The megalodon was gone, but its presence had forever changed their understanding of the deep. The ocean was a place of immense power and ancient wonder, and its secrets were not easily forgotten. And somewhere in the cold, dark depths of the abyss, the megalodon continued to roam, a primordial giant that would forever haunt the dreams of those who had ventured into its domain. Weeks after their harrowing escape, Emily and her team continued to analyze the data they had collected. The discovery of the megalodon had become a global sensation, but it also stirred a mix of excitement and trepidation. The possibility that the creature could pose a threat to human activities deepened the urgency to address the situation. The government, recognizing the potential risks, decided to fund a final, decisive mission to eliminate the megalodon and secure the trench. Emily was reluctantly chosen to lead this mission, with the hope that her first-hand experience would guide their efforts. The new expedition was armed with advanced weaponry, including underwater explosives and a state-of-the-art submersible designed specifically for combat scenarios. Emily, Mark, Sarah, and a highly trained crew prepared for what was to be the most dangerous mission of their lives. As they descended into the trench for the final time, the Abyssal Explorer was equipped with reinforced plating and enhanced propulsion systems. The crew was on high alert, aware that their objective was not just survival, but neutralizing a formidable predator. The descent was tense. The trench's darkness enveloped them as they navigated toward the depths where the megalodon had last been sighted. Emily's heart pounded as they approached the area, the memory of their previous encounter fresh in her mind. "Keep your eyes open," Emily instructed, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. "We're going to have to be quick and precise." The sonar picked up the familiar massive shape, and the crew's anxiety spiked. The megalodon was circling them, its presence unmistakable. Its growls echoed through the depths, a haunting reminder of the danger that awaited them. Sarah deployed a series of underwater drones equipped with high-intensity lights and sound systems to lure the megalodon into a controlled area. The drones created a cacophony of noise and flashing lights, drawing the creature's attention away from the submersible. Emily and Mark prepared the underwater explosives, carefully positioning them along the trench walls. The plan was to drive the megalodon into a confined space where they could use the explosives to deliver a decisive blow. With the drones successfully distracting the megalodon, the Abyssal Explorer maneuvered into position. The creature followed the drones into the trap, its massive body twisting and turning as it responded to the stimuli. Now, Emily shouted, signaling Mark to initiate the explosive deployment. The explosives were activated, and a series of controlled detonations rocked the trench. The underwater explosions created a shockwave, temporarily stunning the megalodon and forcing it into a corner. The trench walls reverberated with the force of the blasts, and the creature roared in fury. Despite the chaos, the megalodon remained resilient. It thrashed violently, its enormous jaws snapping through the water with deadly intent. The abyssal explorer was jolted by the impacts, but the reinforced hull held firm. Emily's team worked frantically to stabilize the submersible and prepare for the final assault. They had one last chance to end the threat. As the megalodon struggled within the confines of the trap, Emily and Mark prepared a final, more powerful explosive. This device was designed to deliver a concentrated blast, aimed directly at the heart of the creature. "Get ready," Emily said, her voice tense. "We have to be precise. One wrong move, and we could all be in danger." With a steady hand, Emily and Mark launched the final explosive into the heart of the trap. The device was equipped with a high-resolution targeting system that allowed them to lock in on the megalodon location. The explosive was detonated, sending a powerful shockwave through the trench. The megalodon let out a deafening roar as the explosion struck it directly. The force of the blast was immense, and the water around them was momentarily lit up by the explosion. The trench was filled with debris and sediment as the dust settled. Emily and her team carefully approached the area, their eyes scanning for any signs of the megalodon. The creature's massive form lay still amidst the wreckage, a testament to the power of their final assault. "We did it," Mark said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion. "It's over." Emily nodded, her face a mask of grim satisfaction. "We've neutralized the threat. The trench is safer now." As they made their way back to the surface, the crew felt a profound sense of accomplishment, but also a heavy burden. The megalodon had been a relic of a bygone era, a reminder of the ocean's untamed power. The abyssal explorer broke through the surface, and the crew emerged into the light, greeted by the warmth of the sun. The sea, though still vast and mysterious, was no longer a harbor for the ancient predator. The successful mission was celebrated as a monumental achievement, but it also prompted a deeper reflection on humanity's relationship with the ocean. Emily and her team were hailed as heroes, but the experience left them with a heightened respect for the mysteries that lay beneath the waves. Emily stood on the shore once more, looking out at the sea. The battle with the megalodon had changed her forever. The ocean was a place of immense beauty and danger, a realm where ancient creatures still lurked in the shadows. The megalodon was gone, but its legacy remained, a reminder of the deep, primordial forces that shaped our world. The trench, now free of its monstrous inhabitant, would continue to be a place of wonder and discovery, but also a place where caution and respect were paramount. As Emily and her team returned to their lives, they carried with them the knowledge that the ocean's secrets were both a gift and a challenge. The megalodon was no longer a threat, but its story would remain a part of their own, a tale of survival, bravery, and the unending quest to understand the depths of our planet's mysterious oceans. The Old Sea Captain's Tavern was always the first stop for weary sailors, a dimly lit sanctuary from the ceaseless roll of the waves. Tonight, however, the atmosphere was thick with something more than the usual haze of tobacco smoke and spilled ale. A chill had settled over the room, and the patrons, weathered men who had seen more than their fair share of storms, whispered in hushed tones, glancing nervously towards the battered wooden door. At the center of the room, with his back to the flickering fire, sat Captain Elias Thorne. His face was a craggy map of a life spent on the sea, his eyes as cold and distant as the waters he had traversed. Thorne had not been in the tavern for years, but tonight, he was the center of attention. The whispers grew louder, punctuated by occasional glances in his direction. "Captain Thorne, is it true?" one of the men dared to ask. His voice trembled with a mix of curiosity and dread. Thorne's eyes, shadowed by the brim of his weather-beaten hat, locked onto the speaker. For a long moment, he said nothing. The firelight cast dancing shadows across his face, making his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice gravelly and laden with a weight of long-buried secrets. "You want to know about the Kraken, do you?" Thorne's tone was both weary and contemptuous. "You think you're ready for the truth?" The tavern fell silent. Even the fire seemed to dim as if it too was waiting for the revelation. "Aye," the man said, nodding slowly. "We've heard stories, legends of a beast so vast it could drag a ship under with a single sweep of its tentacles. They say it's more than just a story, that it's real." Captain Thorne took a long swig from his tankard before setting it down with a resounding clunk. His gaze wandered to the wall where old nautical maps and faded paintings of ships at sea were pinned. "It's real," Thorne said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "and it's hungry." The murmur in the tavern grew louder, a cacophony of disbelief and fear. Captain Thorne's eyes narrowed as he regarded the crowd. "I'll tell you," he said slowly, "but be warned. The tale I'm about to share is not for the faint of heart. It's a story of despair, madness, and death." The crowd leaned in closer, their breath misting in the cool air of the tavern. Thorne began his tale, his voice steady but laced with the echoes of past horrors. The Ship of the Damned. It was a moonless night when Captain Elias Thorne first encountered the Kraken. He was young then, the ink of youth still fresh in his veins, commanding the merchant ship Serenity. The sea was calm, and the stars were obscured by an uncharacteristic fog that had rolled in from the horizon. It was this fog that would prove to be the harbinger of doom. The crew of the Serenity was in high spirits, having just completed a profitable voyage. The hold was filled with spices and precious goods, and laughter and song echoed through the ship. But the sea, as always, had other plans. The fog enveloped the Serenity with a suffocating grip, smothering the stars and turning the world into an endless, oppressive gray. The crew grew uneasy, their songs dying away as the silence of the fog pressed in on them. "Captain, we should drop anchor," suggested First Mate Hawkins. His voice was tight with worry, but Thorne waved him off with a casual gesture. "There's nothing to fear. We've weathered worse than this." But Thorne's bravado was a fragile mask over his growing unease. As the hours ticked by, the fog seemed to thicken, pressing down on the ship like a living entity. Strange noises began to echo through the mist. Sudden splashes, eerie groans, and the occasional low, rumbling growl. It was at this point that the crew began to see the first signs of trouble. The water around the ship started to churn, and a great pressure seemed to build beneath them. Men scrambled nervously, their faces pale with fear. "Captain, something's coming up from below," one of the sailors shouted, pointing towards the water. Thorne peered over the railing, his heart pounding in his chest. Through the fog, he could make out the dark shape of something massive moving beneath the surface, something that defied all reason and comprehension. Before he could react, the Serenity was suddenly jolted as if struck by a colossal force. The ship lurched violently, throwing men off their feet and causing cargo to crash about. The crew screamed in terror as the water around them began to froth and boil. A monstrous appendage as thick as a ship's mast and covered in bristling suckers shot out of the water and coiled around the Serenity. The Kraken had arrived. The tentacle squeezed the ship with a strength that defied belief, splintering the wood and tearing through the hull. Water poured into the hold in a relentless torrent, and the Serenity began to list dangerously. "Man the pumps, brace for impact." Thorne roared over the chaos, trying to maintain some semblance of order. But it was too late. The Kraken's tentacles continued their relentless assault, ripping apart the ship with methodical precision. The crew fought bravely, but their efforts were in vain against the sheer power of the beast. One by one, men were thrown into the sea, their screams swallowed by the darkness. Captain Thorne, clinging to a piece of wreckage, watched in horror as the Serenity was devoured by the Kraken. The beast's enormous maw opened, revealing rows of sharp, glistening teeth. The ship, now nothing more than splinters and debris, was slowly pulled under the surface. The last thing Thorne saw before the darkness claimed him was the Kraken's enormous eye, cold, malevolent, and impossibly ancient. It was as if the beast had been waiting, lurking in the depths for centuries, and now it had claimed its prize. When Thorne awoke, he was adrift in the open sea, the remnants of the Serenity scattered around him. He was the sole survivor of that nightmarish encounter, and as he clung to a piece of driftwood, he vowed to never speak of the Kraken again. The beast had left him alive for a reason, and Thorne knew that the creature's hunger was far from sated. He was eventually rescued by a passing vessel, but the experience had left him a broken man. The Kraken's curse had followed him, manifesting in nightmares and a relentless sense of dread that never left him. He returned to port, but the sea was no longer his friend. It was a reminder of the horror that lurked beneath. Years had passed since Captain Elias Thorne had narrowly escaped the clutches of the Kraken. His once proud visage had been marred by time and trauma, his eyes haunted by a darkness that went beyond mere shadows. He had left the sea behind, seeking solace in the landlocked village of Havenport, where the villagers knew him only as a reclusive old man who lived on the outskirts of town. Havenport was a quaint place, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, far removed from the dangers of the open sea. Yet, the whispers of the Kraken's curse seemed to follow Thorne, infecting the quiet village with an undercurrent of unease. One stormy evening, as the wind howled through the trees and rain battered the windows, a group of young sailors from the local port gathered in the village inn. They spoke of adventure and riches, their eyes bright with the dreams of a life on the high seas. The inn's fire crackled, casting a warm glow on the rough-hewn wooden walls, but the young men's excitement seemed to fade in the face of one persistent shadow, Captain Thorne. "Have you ever heard the story of Captain Thorne?" one of the sailors asked, leaning closer to his friends. "The old man who lives at the edge of town. They say he's seen things no man should ever see." Another sailor, slightly older and more skeptical, scoffed. "That's just old sailors' tales, stories to keep us from chasing our own dreams." But the youngest among them, a wide-eyed lad named Tom, was not so easily convinced. "I've heard strange things. They say he's not right in the head, that he's haunted by what he saw." The conversation was interrupted by the innkeeper, who set down a tray of food with a gruff nod. The sailors turned their attention back to their meal, but the seed of curiosity had been planted in Tom's mind. As the night wore on, Tom found himself unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The storm outside seemed to grow more violent, the wind screeching like a banshee. Finally, driven by an urge he couldn't quite explain, Tom decided to visit Captain Thorne. The captain's cottage was a small, dilapidated structure on the edge of the village, surrounded by a thick tangle of trees. The storm had turned the path to Thorne's home into a muddy quagmire, but Tom pressed on, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. When he reached the captain's doorstep, he hesitated for a moment, his knuckles hovering over the worn wood of the door. He took a deep breath and knocked 3 times. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing Captain Thorne. The old man's eyes were dim, but they held a glint of curiosity as he regarded the young sailor. "What do you want?" Thorne's voice was rough, like the grinding of old gears. I wanted to hear your story," Tom stammered, trying to keep his voice steady, "about the Kraken." Thorne's expression darkened, and he hesitated before stepping aside to let Tom in. The interior of the cottage was dimly lit, the walls lined with nautical charts and strange artifacts. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, and the room seemed to press in on Tom from all sides. "Sit," Thorne instructed, motioning to a rickety wooden chair by the fire. Tom took a seat, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Thorne settled into an armchair across from him, the firelight casting long shadows across his face. For a moment, he was silent, his gaze distant. "What do you wish to know?" Thorne asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom swallowed hard. "Everything. What happened out there? What did you see?" Thorne's face grew even darker, and he looked away. "It's not a tale for the faint-hearted. It's a curse that you don't want to understand." "But I need to know," Tom pressed. "If there's a chance it could help me." "It won't help you," Thorne cut him off sharply. "It will only bring you closer to the abyss. The Kraken is not something you can escape once you've glimpsed it." Despite Thorne's warnings, Tom was undeterred. "Please, Captain, tell me what you know." With a resigned sigh, Thorne began his story, his voice trembling as he recounted the horrors of that fateful night. The aftermath. In the weeks following the attack, Captain Thorne's life had been a nightmare of broken memories and fractured sanity. He had returned to port as a ghost, a shadow of the man he once was. The sea that had been his home now felt like a prison, and the village of Havenport offered him no solace. The Kraken's curse had twisted his mind, leaving him plagued by visions of the monstrous creature that lurked beneath the waves. Thorn's nights were haunted by dreams of the beast's enormous eye, its cold gaze staring into the depths of his soul. During the day, he would wander the village in a daze, muttering incoherent warnings to anyone who would listen. The villagers, unsure of what to make of him, kept their distance, leaving Thorn to his own tormented existence. But the Kraken's curse was not limited to Thorn alone. The stormy night that had claimed the Serenity had left a mark on Havenport. The village's fishermen reported strange occurrences, disappearances of boats, and mysterious deep-sea tremors that defied explanation. Rumors spread like wildfire, and the once quiet village was now a place of fear and suspicion. Tom listened intently, his eyes wide as Thorn spoke of the Kraken's terrible power. "It's not just a creature," Thorn explained. "It's a force of nature, a living nightmare that has no place in this world. And once it's tasted your fear, it will never let you go." As the night wore on, Tom felt a growing sense of dread. He had come seeking answers, but now he was beginning to understand that some questions were better left unasked. Thorn's tale was more than a story. It was a warning, a glimpse into a darkness that should never be disturbed. "Captain," Tom said quietly, "what can I do to protect myself?" Thorn's eyes were haunted, and he looked away. "There's nothing you can do. Once the Kraken has marked you, it will follow you. Your only hope is to stay away from the sea. Never let it claim you, or you'll be lost just like the rest of us." Tom nodded, a chill running down his spine. He stood to leave, but Thorn's voice stopped him. "Be careful, lad," Thorn warned. "The Kraken doesn't forget, and neither should you." As Tom stepped out into the stormy night, he felt a profound sense of unease. The village of Havenport, with its quiet streets and hidden fears, seemed to close in around him. The storm raged on, and the wind howled with a sound that seemed almost alive. The storm raged on, a relentless tempest that seemed to echo Tom's mounting fear. As he made his way back to the village, the rain stung his face and the wind roared in his ears. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that something unseen was lurking just beyond the edge of the storm's fury. Back in Havenport, the village was a scene of growing unease. The storm had driven the villagers indoors, their homes lit only by flickering candlelight. Rumors of the Kraken's curse had taken root, feeding a collective anxiety that was palpable in the air. Tom's encounter with Captain Thorn had only heightened these fears. Tom sought refuge in his small cottage, hoping to find solace from the storm and the haunting tales he had heard. He lit a fire in the hearth and sat down, trying to steady his racing thoughts. Despite his best efforts, sleep eluded him. Every creak of the house and every gust of wind seemed to whisper promises of doom. Hours passed, and as the storm showed no sign of abating, Tom decided he could no longer ignore the gnawing sense of dread that had taken hold of him. He grabbed a lantern and decided to visit Captain Thorn once more, hoping to find some reassurance or a solution to the nightmare that seemed to be closing in on him. Thorn's cottage was just as Tom had left it, a dark, foreboding place on the edge of the village. He knocked on the door, and after a long moment, Thorn answered, his face etched with fatigue and worry. "Captain Thorn, I need your help," Tom said urgently. "The storm, it feels different, almost like something is coming. What should I do?" Thorn's eyes were distant, and he shook his head slowly. "I've told you what I know. There's nothing left to say. The Kraken's curse is not something you can escape. If it's found you, there's no safe place." Before Tom could respond, the wind howled louder and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. Thorn's face went pale and he stepped aside, gesturing for Tom to enter. Inside, the flickering fire cast eerie shadows on the walls. Thorn's hands trembled as he poured them both a drink, but the warmth of the fire did little to dispel the cold, oppressive atmosphere. "I don't know how it's found us," Thorn said, his voice quivering, "but it's here and it's angry." Tom's heart pounded. "What do you mean? How could it be here?" Thorn's gaze was fixed on the darkening sky outside. "The Kraken is no mere beast. It's a force that transcends our understanding. It follows those it has marked, and it will not rest until it has claimed them." As Thorn spoke, the storm outside grew more violent. The wind howled like a banshee, and the rain pounded against the windows with a relentless fury. Tom felt a shiver run down his spine as he noticed something in the distance, a dark, shadowy shape moving through the storm, just beyond the reach of the lantern's light. The shadow grew closer, and the very air seemed to grow colder. Tom and Thorne stared in horror as the monstrous form of the Kraken emerged from the depths of the storm. Its enormous tentacles reached towards the village, the very sky seeming to crackle with its malevolent energy. "This is it," Thorne said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "The Kraken has come to claim what it is owed." Tom's mind raced, but he knew there was no escape. The village was too close, and the Kraken's fury was too great. The beast's massive tentacles lashed out, tearing through the trees and flattening the houses in its path. The village was consumed by chaos, the screams of the villagers mingling with the roar of the storm. Tom and Thorne watched in horror as the Kraken's tendrils snaked through the village, dragging buildings and people into the depths of the storm. The ground shook with each monstrous movement, and the very sky seemed to be collapsing under the weight of the creature's rage. "There's nothing we can do," Thorne said, his voice breaking. "The Kraken has its prey, and it will not be denied." Tom felt a deep sense of despair as he realized the futility of their situation. The Kraken's curse had claimed not just him, but everyone he cared about. As the beast's tentacles reached the edge of Thorne's cottage, he and Tom were thrown into darkness. In the aftermath of the storm, Havenport was left in ruins. The village, once vibrant and full of life, was now a desolate wasteland. The Kraken's attack had left no trace of the people who had once called it home. The storm had passed, but the damage was irrevocable. Captain Elias Thorne's cottage was found in ruins, but there was no sign of the captain or Tom. The few survivors who stumbled upon the wreckage spoke of the terror they had witnessed, of a beast that had emerged from the storm and consumed everything in its path. The Kraken's curse had claimed its victims, leaving behind only whispers and shadows. The village of Havenport was abandoned, its memory fading into legend. The storm that had swept through seemed to have washed away all evidence of the horror that had transpired. But in the darkest depths of the sea, the Kraken remained, a force of primal terror, ever hungry and eternal. It was a reminder that some forces of nature were beyond human comprehension, and that once touched by their darkness, there was no escape. It's lonely out on the ocean, especially at night when the only light you have is from the stars and your own weak lights. The darkness comes in, oppressing everything and taking over like a scourge. Nothing but pure black on a cloudy night. I thought I had seen the worst isolation the world could offer working at Palmer Station in the Antarctic. At least it wasn't as cold out here at Point Nemo, I guess. The furthest point on Earth from any land in every single direction. Point Nemo might be one of the most remote locations on Earth, with a population of 0. Most of the time, at least. There's a small research rig out there, not quite as big as an oil platform, but decent enough sized. I got an offer a couple of years back to go out there and do some studies on the ocean biology out there. Since Nemo is so remote, with relatively stagnant currents, there's a surprising lack of biological life out there. Honestly, it was exciting just for the chance to say I've been to one of the most secluded places on Earth. Getting to study the biome and sea life that was there though, goddamn, I was over the moon. Ecstatic was the understatement of the damned century. I arrived on the platform, a couple of clicks away from the actual point geographically, early in the morning. Clear skies were reflecting off gentle waves in every direction. The deep blue of the ocean here was beautiful, virtually unmarred by human intervention. If anything else, I got some time to read in relative solitude while I was off duty. There were 5 of us at the station. An older guy called Flam was the lead researcher. I don't know how he got the name either. There were 2 assistant researchers, Shannon, a woman in her mid-30s, and Hap, a younger man with a specialty in deep-sea biology. The last person was a mechanic, Sandy, who made sure the everyday maintenance of the rig was maintained. I was the happiest bitch in the world stepping off the chopper and meeting everyone, getting the full tour of the base, including the rec room, gym, mess hall, 3 separate labs, and a surprisingly cozy library. Everyone was nice enough, though Flam was a little neurotic to say the least. Probably important to mention how this place was set up. If you've ever seen a free-floating oil rig, it's a lot like that, just without the ecological destruction. Think of it like a very large ship supported by pontoons, with some parts extending under the water with a larger building up top. What you would call the ground floor is the mess hall, rec room, and gym with the labs on top and the library nestled in the center of them. Our barracks were below sea level, extending it down with the maintenance area underneath housing generators, gas, etc. It was a nice place, all things considered. A cabin in the middle of the ocean, basically. Settling in that first night was rough. Sleeping underwater essentially was a little terrifying, kind of claustrophobic, and completely fucking nauseating. Despite the large pontoons holding us up, the waves still rocked us, making me feel my welcome dinner warming up for an encore as I swayed. Sandy came walking through, going to the shared bathroom between our rooms. "You alright, Ellie?" she asked, looking concerned. All I could do was shake my head, making the nausea take hold harder in the process. Oh god. She was watching while I puked into a trash can. Hell of a way to make new friends, Ellie. I was surprised when she walked over and grabbed my loose hair, holding it back and rubbing my back with her other hand, gently soothing me as I evacuated everything I ate today. All good. Happens to everyone on the first day. "Please tell me it gets better," I said, gasping for breath and only getting the stench of vomit back. "Oh yeah, just need to adjust. Come on up to the deck and get some air though, it helps." She led me up, walking single file on the narrow staircase. I bumped my shoulders countless times, unsteadied by the surf moving us. At one point I started falling back, losing my balance, and reaching out to steady myself, but only swiped the empty wall. Suddenly, her hand darted out, grabbing my forearm and steadying me. She pulled me back to the step, making sure I was upright before moving further, now holding onto my hand as guidance. Soon she was chuckling. "Hope you're better above deck than you are below." "You and me both." I gagged again, just trying to talk, my head still spinning. The fresh salt air when we emerged from the outer door onto the wraparound platform was like opening a valve for me. I was taking in the deepest breaths I could, finally clearing out the vomit smell stuck in my nose. She leads me over to the platform railing, the dark night settling in around us. I was immediately distracted from my nausea by the beauty in the sky above. There were a decent amount of clouds covering the sky, but what wasn't covered was some of the most amazing stargazing I had ever been privy to. Every single constellation was clearly definable beyond the clouds, with a full moon shining through, sending light in patches to reflect off the water. An infinite sea of stars in every direction. It was beautiful, something that's only on par with seeing the northern lights in their full glory, as far as I've seen. Even in the imposing dark out at Point Nemo, millions of points of light shone through. "What's that?" I said, noticing movement against the water. At first, it looked like the shadow from a cloud passing over, disturbing the stars below. Then a cloud moved from in front of the moon, casting bright light down in all directions. I could see clearly that it wasn't a shadow, but a giant, walking through the ocean step by step. From the distance, it was maybe 5 clicks out. Even then, I could make out its features of it clearly thanks to the size. It towered larger than a skyscraper by my best estimate. Each leg had water reaching up to around the knee. It honestly looked like it was going to break the clouds with its head, but it paid no mind as it whipped them away. Oh my god. I was speechless. I don't know if Sandy was too, but she was staring off into the distance alongside me. If she was shocked, nothing showed on her face, but there was the faintest of smiles hiding underneath. "Your guess is as good as mine, science girl," Sandy replied. I could see clearer now that more were walking behind it, heading to the west of us in a straight path. "We'll need to go downstairs before the waves reach us, though. Sucks for this to happen on your first night." "What? You've seen this before?" I asked, still not tearing my eyes away. The giants were humanoid in build, just like massive versions of people. Their faces were a little more odd. Eyes were larger than normal proportions, and there was a smile on their small mouths that looked like the head was deflating from the bottom like a balloon. Didn't even realize I was shouting when I started talking to her again, gesturing at the Goliaths waiting by. They're massive. How is something this big physically possible? This completely disregards every single law of physics. "I just run the machines," she shouted back. "Come on, let's go inside before we get completely soaked." Oh god, now I could see what she meant. Every step they took was sending waves our way, crashing into each other as rambling gates tried to overtake each other. Seafoam was high in the air, and at one point while backing up to the door, I swear I felt the water spray from overhead like a spring shower. One of them turned, looking directly at me. I swear my heart stopped, breath catching as I caught a full view of the face. I was frozen, paralyzed that it was going to come for me now. Just pick me up and pop me in its mouth like a damn snack before dinner. The deflated smile just kept on, now widening to show toothless gums. I could hear Sandy behind me, yelling to come with her and that we were in danger, but I couldn't break eye contact with the giant. Something ancient was holding me in place, frozen and waiting to be devoured. Then Sandy pulled me back, still trembling at the behemoths as they walked away to whatever strange destination would host them. The door was barely closed, but I could still see the one who was looking at me as it turned to follow the others, massive waves sloshing our way as it came. Suddenly, Sandy braced her and me both against the wall, holding on. That's forward, I said, now looking her right in the eye as my hands pressed into the narrow wall behind her. I was still trembling, elbows refusing to stay still as I pushed against the wall harder. Not going to lie though, she was a much better sight to be face to face with than the giants. "Sorry, you'll thank me," she said, barely finishing the sentence before the entire base was hit hard, turning into a steep angle that sent me falling forward, into her even more. Another wave hit, bouncing us briefly into the air as we braced ourselves, trying not to fall down the tight staircase. We tilted back, standing upright once more though swaying heavily, now back to a calmer sea. Best to get back to our rooms before the next patch hits. We scurried back quickly, nausea coming back to me. I couldn't tell if it was that or the contact we just had that was making me warm, blushing as we walked into the small hallway adjoining our rooms. I sat on my bunk, looking at her still standing in the doorway. "What are those things?" I wanted a straight answer, though I don't know if she had one. Like, they were giants, I get that, but what the fuck did I just see? Beats me, none of us have been able to figure it out. She shrugged, leaning against the doorway now. "You'll see a lot of weird shit out here. Don't know if the others told you that up front, but they're a bunch of hardcore skeptics anyway. So they've seen it too and didn't think they should maybe tell the new girl about it. What if I was out there alone? I would have died." I was almost screaming, now terrified at the proposition of spending 6 months here. Please, they try to tell me it's a trick of the light and isolation. Hell, I thought maybe I was going crazy, but you've helped me out big time here. I finally have a second witness, she said, raising her hands in exasperation. Goddamn, feels gratifying to not be gaslit into thinking I'm losing my damn mind. "I imagine," I said, trying to calm down and not get too overwhelmed this far in. My nausea was still beating at me, making my gag reflex go wild again. This time I'm not entirely sure it was the waves causing it though. I was still coming to grips with seeing fucking giants walking through the ocean. Not to mention the existential dread it was causing was worse than I've felt since grad school. She sat down beside me, handing over the trash can once more. Another huge wave rocked us, sending me flying forward into the wall. I don't know, think maybe since this place is so far from people that it's where old things go to hide or be alone. Though some of these things should be left well enough alone, she said, picking me up as the second wave rocked us back. Nothing I've found too dangerous though, so we've got some peace of mind. God, if that's considered not dangerous, I'm afraid to see what else there is, I said, curling up in my bunk and pulling my knees to my chest. I was still warm, with the ventilation on the station feeling more like stale air being fed back through. She only smiled back, giving me a brief goodnight before heading into her room and closing her door. It took me hours to drift off. Waves kept assailing us through the night, and eventually I tied myself to the bunk using my blanket to at least try to stay in place. Unfortunately, it didn't do anything for the nausea, which came and went all night. Every few minutes a smaller wave would rock us, making me fear that one of those things was on their way to stomp us into the depths. Finally, almost asleep, their faces stared me down from behind my eyelids, like the balloons deflating, or even just ready to pop right from their bulging eyes as they just smiled away. Those eyes had something behind them, not malice, at least I don't think so. Apathy might have been more fitting. Every time I remember the one that looked at me making eye contact with pupils the size of cruise ships, it was like a god studying an ant. I was just a bug in their environment, no better than something they would step on during their journey, moving on without guilt. How old does something have to be to get that big? Could these things be older than any of the history we've discovered yet? Good God, my mind wouldn't let me sleep almost as much as the nausea. It was the early hours of the morning before I was finally out, and thank fuck the others must have seen I was exhausted, though only Sandy knew it wasn't just because of the waves. When I got up the next morning, still groggy as hell and searching desperately for the coffee pot, I noticed we had portholes along the outer walls of the living quarters. Maybe it was just too dark to notice before, but after finally getting coffee in my system, I decided to take a look out, at least to assure myself the ocean outside wasn't out to get me. Everything we knew about Point Nemo so far was that it was a lifeless, for the most part, stretch of the ocean. Even just looking at the sun filtering through the water is relaxing for me, so I had hope. Pulling up a chair, I settled in next to the window. Thanks to the shallow depth, it was large enough to get a good view all around, and even bubbles out of the side a little so you have some peripheral vision. Small strands of sunlight piercing the surface finally gave me some soothing relaxation setting in. I was drifting off, gazing out into the blue wonder when it opened. If it was one of the giants, I'm not entirely sure. A huge eye was staring me down through the porthole, two irises meeting in the middle of it to pierce right through the porthole, and through me. I felt the same primal fear that had set in the night before, but this wasn't like the giants. I felt malice in this, studying the entire base like we were the ones being researched. It didn't hit me until a moment later how massive it must have been. Only the deep yellow surrounding the irises to tell me how far away this leviathan was. Despite the distance, I could make out every feature. The depths welcome you. I didn't hear it necessarily. It was like an intrusive thought entering my mind as the irises pulsated, dilating to get a better look at me. Primal fear set in again, telling every nerve in my body to run. Too bad there's nowhere to run in the middle of the ocean. Don't look at it. Sandy was suddenly beside me, snapping the cover shut on the porthole with a quick slam. Huh? I was back, the chill still working its way down my back as I came back to the dry confines of the base. Just don't look at it. It says some awful things, she said, now looking me right in the eyes, more serious than I'd seen her even with the giants. That thing is different from the others. I've only ever seen the eye, but I don't know. I think making eye contact with it is like an invitation. Just don't do it, to be safe. I didn't even have words at this point. I was one day in, already with most of my assumedly broad knowledge and understanding of the world in shambles. Everything I was here for felt secondary, pointless research on algae and ocean bacteria when I might as well have seen a god just hours ago. My anxiety and existential dread were vying for control of every brain cell, and I was the only loser here. Giants were simple, honestly, though I can feel the chill of empty ocean spray to this day, freezing my bones at the thought. If they were the extent of what I saw, it would have been fine. Nothing normal in the middle of the ocean though. The 6 months I spent there felt like they alternated between blissful dreams and the worst fever nightmares I've ever had. A couple of weeks passed without incident. I got deep into my research, taking water samples, testing the amount of microorganisms and other boring science shit that I know nobody reading this cares about. I was starting to get more familiar with the rig and those on it, though it was taking some getting used to. Flam. He was a weird dude, extremely neurotic and always seemed like he was spaced out. Shannon was uptight as hell, usually more likely to bitch at anyone in range than be anywhere near helpful. Hap was nice, though I think he kept trying to awkwardly hit on me without realizing I wasn't too interested in men. Can't say I blame him though, it gets lonely out here. Sandy ended up being one of my greatest comforts out on the cold ocean. In the evenings we would sit out on the platform, watching waves pass by as the sun set on the horizon. Despite everything I had seen out here so far, it was calming, almost serene when it looked like this. I was just losing myself in the sunset, gazing off into the distance when suddenly a skunky smell hit me, almost knocking me back to my college days. "How did you get weed out here?" I asked, turning to look at her lighting up a joint. All she did was laugh at me. "Why, you a cop now?" she said back. We passed it back and forth, laughing as the plant took more of an effect. At some point Shannon walked out, though all she could do was be disapproving and tell us that we shouldn't be doing that here. Sandy's retort made me laugh even harder. "We're on maritime law, babe. Nothing illegal out here." Shannon only shook her head, looking directly at me before walking down to the living quarters. "Remember, we're taking a dive tomorrow morning. I don't want you fucked up when we go down." I saluted, giving a stiff "A, Cap'n," as she walked off in a huff. "Nervous about going down there?" Sandy asked me now, getting serious again. "A little. I know we're not going too deep for this one, but it's still a little terrifying, you know," I replied, looking out at the reflecting sun as it dipped below the horizon line. In a little over 12 hours, I would be taking our small submersible down to the twilight zone, almost 2,000 meters, to see what kind of organic life is down there. I might have been a little excited, because there was always the possibility of discovering some new species. Wonder if they would name it after me. Sandy and I shot the shit for a while longer before finally heading to bed, hoping to get some at least decent sleep before reaching the dark depths. I slept fitfully that night, in fear of what we may find down there. I hadn't seen the giants again, but that giant eye through the porthole the other day was still haunting me every time I tried to close my eyes. All I could hear was its voice, telling me to join them in the depths. After one of the worst nights of sleep I've ever had, we started loading in. The submersible was cramped, with stale air being pumped through for ventilation that left me sweating. Flam and I went down together, with Shannon and Hap staying back up with Sandy as our comms. The only window was at the very front, a small porthole with an incredibly limited view of only what was directly ahead. Maybe the worst part was that other than the console lights and a couple of low red accent lights to see by, this thing was completely dark. I felt like I was crammed into a can, and my claustrophobia was not doing well. The descent was fine, nothing out of the ordinary at least. We went in phases to be safe, dropping a few hundred meters at a time before stopping for a few minutes, making sure there weren't any issues with the submersible. I kept looking over at the small hatch that we clambered in through, a bulkhead and multiple thick seals keeping us from the massive pressure outside. Every damn creak this thing made as we descended, I expected to be liquefied where I sat, lost forever to the depths outside. Even in the stuffy air of the sub, I was getting a chill. Approaching 1,500 meters, Shannon's voice coming over the small radio, reaching target depth in about 5 minutes. "Thank you," Flam said, flipping a couple of switches and pushing the shift further. I don't know if that's what it was, but it looked like there was a flight stick installed to control this thing. Better than an Xbox controller, but still. "Ellie, turn on the outside cameras, please." "Copy that," I said, flipping around buttons in front of me. The 3 screens in front of me flashed on, 8 different feeds popping up. We had wide-angle cameras on the port and starboard side, one at the top and bottom of each end of the sub. All the corners were covered, giving us a full view of everything within our radius. Cameras on, powering on lights. The lights outside came on, flooding the ocean darkness around us. Despite the output of the lights, strong enough to light a damn fire back on land if you left it on for too long, we were only able to pierce the abyss so far before losing sight. That was when I saw movement right off the edge of our front starboard camera. My heart skipped a beat, amazed we found something already as we had barely reached depth at this point. "There's something out in front. Go forward toward starboard," I told Flam, trying to study what was there just at the edge of our visibility. Flam moved us forward, slowly so as not to scare whatever it was off. Unfortunately, whatever it was dashed off, but on the screen as it ran away, it almost looked humanoid, dashing off like an Olympic swimmer. "You see that?" Yes, it's much faster than us though, Flam said, still pushing the flight stick down, propelling us deeper. Still not there yet. We're at 2,000, Flam. Think we're deep enough for what we're after, I said, looking over at him with anxiety rising. How much is this thing rated for? 5,000 meters, he replied, muttering some sort of calculations under his breath while still descending. I know we'll find it. Shannon, Flam is going even deeper, I said, breathless into my radio. My heartbeat was picking up, tension rising as Flam didn't even react to my message. Any idea what's going on? Flam, where are you going? Shannon asked, concern rising in her voice. You need to come back to target depth. We haven't done prep for a deeper dive right now. We'll come back up quickly. I just need to check something, Flam muttered again, flipping the radio off so Shannon couldn't interject. Whoa, okay, Flam, we need to go back up. You're not thinking straight, I said, moving forward to flip the walkie back on. He smacked my hand away, turning with a wild eye reflecting the intense red light of the cabin. I almost fell back from just how much he startled me. Flam may have been a little odd, but usually he was a gentle person, more awkward and introverted than anything. Flam, what the fuck are you doing? They told me I'm welcome in the depths, he said, turning back to the small window and looking out ahead. I have to see them. Okay, that's not a good idea, man. Come on, you take monitors, I'll take pilot. Let's switch, I said, moving to take the console. I felt a sharp pain in my arm, looking over to see he had stabbed me with a lab scalpel he had smuggled on board. I have to see them, he reiterated. The last place uncorrupted by humans. They're waiting for us. He pulled the scalpel from my arm, pointing it at me in warning before turning back to the console. I fell back to the floor, clutching the wound and trying to stem the bleeding. Thinking quick, just trying to live while I still could, I tore my shirt off and wrapped it around the wound, pulling my makeshift tourniquet tight. Stop, take this privilege. Flam was shouting back to me now, voice getting higher and more raving mad with every second that passed. They've promised to show me knowledge that humans could only dream of, things that we've had questions for thousands of years. You would pass up this kind of opportunity. Yes, we're going to fucking die down here, you idiot, I was shouting again. The monitors were flickering, cameras unable to sustain integrity at the increasing depths without proper protection. I could hear the hull clanging as it bent and expanded, trying to keep integrity in the crushing abyss. Flam, what the fuck has gotten into you? Shh. Look, he said, pointing through the front window now. Beyond him, I could see something in the distance, coming into view better as we got closer. What the hell is this? I was looking downward, our submersible pointed toward the depths as he cut off our lights, plunging us into complete darkness. My eyes took a moment, unable to cut through the most complete, terrifying void of nothing I've ever seen. Suddenly, something far below us started to glow, starting faint but getting brighter and brighter as it spread, soon covering the entire seafloor. Cracks and veins ran through the light, all meeting in one central point, flowing towards a deep, dark chasm it circled around. My first thought was bioluminescent microorganisms, because we find that all the time, on in the abyssal zone. This, though, had to be far too large. It would comprise miles and miles of organisms, all glowing in time with each other before stopping at this one deep pit. It was going further than I could see through the viewing window, off to drop further into the depths below. It blinked. At least, I assume it blinked. The glowing purple came rushing close from opposite sides, meeting completely over the pit and plunging us into darkness for a moment. When it opened back up almost immediately, I could feel a shockwave hit the submersible moments later. The chasm in the middle started narrowing to a ravine, a deep glow coming from the furthest depths. It reminded me of a cat's eye, but the glowing purple started becoming a deep red. All I could feel from this thing was an intense hatred, like we were bothersome and waking it from a deep nap. I acted as soon as I possibly could, grabbing the small fire extinguisher we kept at the back and hitting Flam right from behind with it. Thank God it knocked him out immediately and I was able to take the flight stick, pulling back as hard as I possibly could to return to the surface. The narrowed slit kept watching us as we made the ascent, me praying to whatever gods may be on the surface that it didn't decide to come after us. This damn thing must have taken up most of the seafloor, whatever it was. Flam was grumbling beside me now, saying something that didn't even sound like a language I knew of. As we rushed to the surface, hull clanging and banging the entire way, I could finally see light beginning to break through the depths, strands of sun filtering down to guide our way. Flipping the comms on, I immediately heard Shannon shouting through the radio, demanding to know what had happened and if we were still alive. Flam tried to fucking kill us, I said, still pulling back as he started coming back to his senses. He looked like he didn't know where he was or how he got there, now mumbling in perfect English about how much his head was pounding. We're resurfacing. I'll fill you in once we get there. We pulled up to the surface, Sandy grabbing the sub with the lift on the platform as we got near. As soon as I felt the thump of us settling on the platform, I threw the hatch open and ran out to sweet surface air. The salty smell of the ocean was one of the most relieving things ever, but knowing that thing was down there, God, I started babbling to Sandy almost immediately when she ran over, pulling me into a hug as I started crying. Shannon called in a medevac for Flam, who couldn't remember a damn thing since the night before. It's like he wasn't even in control. That knock to the head sorting out whatever short circuit was happening. The chopper picked him up a few hours later, still babbling about how he wasn't sure what happened. Waking up in the sub as we were tearing through the ocean for the surface, all he could remember was looking out of the porthole in the living quarters last night, his usual routine to relax before falling asleep. He said the last thing he remembered was seeing something out there looking back at him. I gave Shannon and Hap a full rundown, disclosing to the med team that, yes, I may have given him potential brain damage. None of them were mad, considering the circumstances, but I think Shannon was suspicious. Can't say I blame her. I told her all about what we saw, but her hard skepticism wouldn't. Take the idea of an eye covering most of the seafloor. Sandy believed me, thank fuck. When we talked about it that night, laying in my bunk, I was sobbing uncontrollably because I felt like I was going fucking insane. After I described it to her though, she surprised me. I've seen it too, she whispered, looking me in the eye from across the pillow. Not like you have, but in dreams. It talks to me sometimes, tells me to swim down to it, feel the embrace of the oceans. I don't like it. There was so much hate in it though, I said, grasping for whatever words I could, through deep, anxious breaths. It looked like it had nothing but loathing for us. The giants were indifferent, but this thing was angry that we were there. Shh, it's okay, she said again, brushing my hair away from teary eyes. You're going to be okay, it won't come up here. What if it does though, Sandy? It's probably bigger than an entire fucking continent. What if it does come up here? We'll all die, Sandy. I was almost screaming, seeing Hap come around the living quarters hallway with concern on his face. Sandy just shooed him away, making a motion that she had everything handled. If it does, not much we can do, but we can face it together, she said, looking deep into my eyes. It was the first comfort I had felt since arriving, before seeing what depth of insanity was out here. She kissed me, holding me tight as I fell asleep. A week later, and I'm still holding in there. The eye still looks into me from my dreams every couple of nights, but Sandy's been keeping me company, comforting me through the nightmares. I'm not really for all the romance stuff, but she had me. Something about her just set me at ease whenever I was on edge, no matter what kind of stress I was under. We were hanging out on the deck that night, sparking up again and watching the stars play off the waves as the night grew longer. I thought at first that I was seeing a star on the horizon, falling toward Earth, but after a moment she noticed it too, standing up and looking out toward the horizon. A pyre of flame was heading our way, roaring over the ocean and boiling the waves as it went. I could see huge sails with a Jolly Roger emblazoned on a flag high above, the flames burning it but never making it fade. It kept getting closer and closer, threatening to ram us at high speed as the two of us started screaming for the others to wake up and get ready for impact. Their screams were audible over the crackling timber and whooshing flames as it came near, and both of us looked back when we heard them. Dozens of people were standing out on the deck of the ship, all doused in flames, burning high into the air alongside the lumber around them. Some were dancing, others were writhing in agony, but all were screaming and shouting to the high moon above like banshees in the night. It was coming at us, speeding ever closer and accelerating the entire damn time. There was nowhere to go, just Sandy and I stuck here against the platform railing as far as possible from the sailing inferno. We hugged each other tight, closing our eyes in preparation to be tossed into the waves by a burning juggernaut. It never happened. The ship passed straight through us like we weren't even there. We could feel heat of flames, the screams whipping by us as it pulled our screams with it, joining the cacophony of hell on the waves. Then it was gone, racing the other way across the sea towards another destination, screams trailing behind as it sunk over the horizon, water reflecting the pyre even after it was out of sight. "Did you guys hear that?" Hap said, coming up from the living quarters and rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Damn, it's hot down there too." Sounded like a bunch of screaming. Did something hit us? Is there a breach? Sandy calmed him before he got panicky, looking at us in the night. "Just us, don't worry, all good out here." "Oh, okay," Hap said, starting to turn for the door before letting out a sudden, understanding, "Oh." "Not like that," Sandy said, shooing him back down to the living quarters as he left. We held each other, looking off into the night where the ship had disappeared to before she spoke. "Gonna be honest, that was a new one for me." "Jesus Christ," was all I could say, heart still racing as I tried catching my breath. She pulled me closer, brushing my hair back over my ear and humming low, a soothing melody as the night returned to peace, completely undisturbed by the death that just roared through. For about 10 years now, I've been a ranger in the Okefenokee Swamp Park. It's the largest blackwater swamp in the entire United States and takes up a good chunk of southeast Georgia. The place is massive, home to all kinds of wildlife from foxes to alligators to the occasional bear. Over the years, I've found that it's not only wildlife that inhabits these swamps though. There's something else out here, not human of course, but the swamp hides its fair share of secrets from the world beyond its waters. One of my earliest memories was during my first year as a junior ranger. I was young, maybe 25 or so when I got the job, and they were drip feeding me new duties as the days went by. Eventually I got to the point where I could do patrols myself if there was anything that needed to be checked on, and they finally gave me the keys to the fan boats we would use to get into the deeper parts. That's what gave me my first scare. It was getting dark out, and some folks came into the station, telling us they had been out hiking and lost one of their buddies. Not too uncommon, considering if you take a wrong turn, there's nothing but water and dense trees to find your way back. And unless you've got a keen eye, you're not going to notice the difference. Now the sun was going down, and they say they hadn't seen him in a few hours, despite calling out for him the entire way back. So, it fell on me to go out there and search while Lena, my partner on duty, was the one to take the report. I grabbed the big-ass flashlight we use for night searches, the boat keys, and headed out the door to see what I could find. They said they had come from the western part of the swamp, a more densely wooded region prone to a lot of flooding. Not a great thing right now as the clouds were coming out for a thunderstorm yet again. Moonlight was in and out, sliding behind clouds and plunging me into darkness every few minutes before re-emerging again for brief illumination whenever it felt like it. The trees above were casting eerie shadows, and every movement from around me made me jump as the night grew darker. Mosquitoes were the worst damn thing out here. Plenty of the bastards were swarming me, almost blocking the floodlight as they swirled around in the beam. It was hard enough seeing anything Tyru. The shadows of the trees out here, but seeing millions of tiny bugs make shadows the size of dogs in the distance. That does some weird shit to your brain. The heat didn't help much either, making my clothes stick to my sweaty skin. I was out there maybe 2 hours, moon high overhead and sun long gone now, when the first shower finally came. Rain started falling slow at first, just a drop here and there as thunder gave ominous rumbles in the background. An occasional flash of lightning would overtake my surroundings, completely overpowering the beam of my flashlight and making the entire swamp around visible. That was when I first started to notice them. It looked like people at first, hiding behind trees, obscured in shadows and branches to keep from being seen. Some were taller than others, some a bright, sun-bleached white, while others appeared covered in mold and dirt. The first one I barely caught in the light as it ducked back behind a tree, long white fingers on one hand being the only thing I saw before they slipped back into the darkness behind it. I saw another one 10 minutes later, though this one was much more clear. It was in the middle of the trees, partially submerged in some of the water and muck below. From the waist up, there was a mostly decayed body, stripped by the bugs and weathered down to the bone already, ribs holding rotten ribbons of flesh on them. It disappeared as quickly as my light hit it, one rotting eye still staring at me from its skull as it submerged under the water, leaving me shaking in fear. Despite trying to get a message back to Lena, I didn't have any signal going through on my walkie. I was finally around the space where they said they had lost their friend, and I started yelling for him, despite how scared shitless I was. Everything I had seen up to that point I was able to just rationalize, I guess. It was my first time out in the swamp on my own, especially this late at night, and the weather wasn't helping my nerves. Ahead of me the trees opened up in a clearing, nothing but a small pond unmarred by roots or trunks sticking through. The rain stopped suddenly, moon appearing from behind the clouds now and shining down on the dark black water below, reflecting its light. There, standing in the middle of the clearing with hands stretched high into the sky, as if pleading for the moon to come down and meet it, was a body. Hell, a body was probably putting it mildly, as this thing was stripped of all flesh, empty sockets where the eyes should be, as it stared up into the moon above. From where I was in the boat, I could see it was dressed in a long, flowing white gown, almost like a wedding dress. I couldn't tell if it was looking in longing, reverence, or both as it reached further toward the moon. It was standing atop the water surface as if it was a smooth glass floor, not even making ripples across the water as it was glowing in the moonlight beneath her. As I was watching, more skeletons and decaying bodies emerged from the water, gliding upward to surround the skeletal bride as she continued reaching for the moon above. They grabbed her, dragging her back down below the surface of the water as the moon was once more hidden by clouds above. I tried shining my floodlight over to see if there was anything still there, but the clearing was completely empty, just shadows dancing off the water's surface again. I turned tail and ran that night. We ended up finding the guy that was missing the next day, somehow wandered right over to one of the nearby highways, though it was a hell of a walk for him to get there. Lena didn't believe me when I told her about the skeletons and decaying bodies in the water, simply looking at me like I was absolutely insane. A year or so later, we were the unlucky site of a murder, or at least, it was initially called a murder. Some poor girl's body was found floating in one of the more touristy areas, totally drained of every damn drop of blood. All they were able to find was one puncture wound in between her neck and shoulder. That wasn't from any animal known to be in the park, so Georgia Bureau of Investigations came in to look around. I got paired up to lead a guy named Sully around the swamps, investigating to see if we could find any sign of where she was killed or a possible weapon even. Good guy. We ended up getting to be friends in the couple of weeks we were going around the whole length of the Okefenokee. One thing we agreed on, the amount of destruction being done to the environment out here needed to stop. There was a mining operation about to start nearby, extracting lithium through strip mines right outside of the damned swamp borders. That was just the latest issue too, because a few of the major train yards had been dumping chemicals for the last few decades that was just now coming to light. God knows it added to the cancer clusters that have been popping up in the youth around here, taking kids way too damn young. What we found one night though, almost a week after beginning our investigation, made us both see that the problems were only going to get worse. Another body had turned up a day earlier, causing a whole other fuss as GBI was still trying to get a handle on the situation. This was a big guy too. They matched him up with a trucker that had gone missing a couple of weeks ago. Big rig found empty and abandoned on the side of the highway nearby. His body was pretty messed up, decay setting in, but he had a similar wound with the same telltale sign. His body was absolutely drained of blood. Sully and I spent the next day tracking deep into the swamp, trying to figure out where it could have come from based on the faint currents through the waters. After about 7 hours of tracking from sunup, we found something. A shallow clearing in the middle of the northeast quadrant, tons of trees clustered around it that kept it mostly closed off, but a small gap between that became a floodgate essentially when it rained. We theorized that was what was letting the bodies loose, allowing them to drift over to the more populated areas of the swamp where they would be found. Our theory was somewhat backed up almost immediately, and we definitely found the origin point of the dead people. Inside this clearing, bodies were piled up in various states of decay. Every single one was drained of blood, the newest corpse probably being only a few days old at most. Alabaster white skin was glowing against the dark waters, making me feel nauseated in the humid afternoon. The whole area smelled of death, with the bodies adding onto the decay from rotting trees and vegetation. It was worse than the time I found a rotting bear near the park entrance. Poor bastard almost torn in half by a car that hit him. They all had the same puncture wound, though it was on different sides for some of the bodies, probably just wherever the killer was able to get a good angle in. Sully pulled out his radio to make a call back to the station, letting them know what we had found. Unfortunately, they said it was going to be a bit before more people could come out thanks to an emergency in town. The downside of living in the rural South is there are only so many resources spread thin over a huge area. We would just have to set up and wait for someone to come out here, but in the meantime, we had our own plan. In the off chance the killer returned, we parked our boat a little ways away downstream, anchoring it to a nearby tree out of sight. Then we got out, waders and boots on, to keep from getting totally soaked as we made our way back toward the small clearing. The sun was getting low, and we knew we would have to take a position soon to make sure nothing took us by surprise. There was a little luck on our side though, because one of the old ranger outposts was nearby, a small, rotting cabin built up on rickety platforms. We crammed ourselves in, getting ready for what could be a long night. Maybe 2 hours passed with nothing. I think I ended up falling asleep on one of the rusty folding chairs left in the outpost. The place was bare, an old landline phone hanging on one wall, a small desk in the corner, and one dingy light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Damn thing didn't even work, and there probably wasn't any power coming in here anyway. Sully got outside and looked around for a little bit while I was snoozing inside, and when he woke up, showed me the reason we didn't have power. The small post stringing wire along for electricity was ripped out of the ground, nothing but a frayed wire still hanging loose above the water. No doubt that was a major safety hazard, but it's not like anyone ever came out this far. We started checking the further reaches of the swamp a lot more often after this situation, hoping to avoid another pile of bodies coming up like it did. The sun was gone in the sky by the time we realized our serial killer was much worse than some awful human. Sully had a fancy pair of night binoculars and we were trading off back and forth, watching the spot to see if anyone was coming. Hell, we were scanning the entire damn area, desperately trying to see anyone coming up before they actually got too close. That way we could get a better look. Our worst fear was that they would come up to their dumping spot with another body to get rid of, probably drained of blood again. Of course, that was a confirmed reality just a few minutes after midnight. Nobody had shown up out here still, with the two of us debating throwing down a GPS marker and heading back to the main station. I was on watch, scanning the area from left to right when suddenly there was a figure standing in the clearing. Damned thing was huge, standing probably 9 feet tall at least. It was holding another body, likely drained as well, because it flung it next to a tree moments after I caught sight, making it crumple to the water below. I grabbed Sully, pointing in the direction of the clearing and handing him the binoculars to get a look. His gasps were something I'll never forget, because the thing turned right toward us there. This giant bastard was like Mothman's fucked up southern cousin. Bristles of stiff spines all along its arms and legs, with at least 6 arms sprouting down the body. 2 ended in sharp points, which we initially thought was what it used to kill its victims. The others had human-like hands, though the fingers were deadly sharp at their tips. Then it looked to the body it had just thrown aside, something unfurling from its face. The huge, red eyes were glowing in the moonlight, hexic patterns reflecting everything around it. As the mouth stretched, I realized it was a sharp, needle-like beak that it then punctured the fresh body with. I couldn't tell what it was doing, but the body started to shiver, something squirming through the still skin as it made itself inward. That was all me and Sully needed to see, because we had no idea what the hell this thing was other than an abomination against God. The situation with a believed murderer meant we got clearance to carry firearms, and both of us drew ours now. Sully had a rifle, while I just had a standard issue pistol. We gave ourselves a moment to prepare, grabbing a couple of old flares from within the desk in case they might come in handy, and moved out. We made it to the edge of the clearing, still hidden from this damn thing and whatever it was doing. As Sully poked his barrel around the corner, waiting for the right moment, the damn thing turned and locked its giant, red eyes with mine. It wasn't human for sure, and the only thing behind those eyes was the desire to feed, breed, and eat some more. This was the stereotypical southern pest, made into one of my greatest fucking nightmares. Soon as it looked at us, Sully fired a shot off, hitting it in one arm. The damn thing took off flying, both of us firing shots up after it. I think one of our shots found the right mark because it shot through one of the wings, causing it to lose lift and start falling back down. I fired again, this time hitting it on the lower jaw, taking out the massive needle of a mouth. One more shot, and we could take this thing out. My clip was empty, and when I went to reload, the mosquito man rushed at us, making me fumble the new clip into the dark water. The creature hit Sully, sending him flying backwards before splashing down into the muck behind us. I started to run back towards the outpost, picking Sully up as I went. He had lost his gun when he was thrown, meaning we were shit out of luck when it came to defenses. As we hauled ourselves up onto the outpost platform, I uncapped one of the flares, throwing it at the lumbering creature now wading towards us. It didn't handle the deeper water well, despite the great height advantage it had, and was struggling to pull its feet from the muck below. As we got inside, Sully slammed the door behind us, pulling the deadbolt which snapped from rust. It was only a moment before a loud thump shook the entire outpost, the creature landing on the platform outside. There was nothing we could do but press ourselves to the back wall, hoping that it might lose interest and leave. Now would have been an awesome time for some of the others to show up like they were supposed to hours ago, but no such luck there. One of the sharp arms busted through the thin wooden door, tearing a piece out as it was pulled back. The thing was coming in now, forcing itself through the small doorway while tearing the wooden panels out from the door and wall. There was little chance for us to get away, but we had to try at least. I opened up the shutter over the back window, exposing a dingy pane of glass roughly half my size. I pulled my arm back, smashing it with my elbow to get out, and pulling Sully out with me as the creature got closer in the outpost. Uncapping the last flare, I threw it into the window behind me, letting the bright flame ignite the old, rotting wood inside. We clambered back, trying to make our way from behind the outpost back to our boat before the thing got out. The scream that damn thing let out is something I'll never forget, sounding like dozens of voices crying out at once as the flames licked at its skin. I saw the window burst outward, wall around it being blasted out with flames reaching closer to us. The creature fell out, body half on fire and sizzling as it fell from the platform and hit the water below. We had to get out, water splashing up through my waders at this point and chilling me in the humid air. I could see blue sparks coming a few feet away in the darkness, the live wire on a post that Sully had pointed out earlier. The idea was a risky one, but if it meant I could at least take the bastard out with me, I'd try it. It was gurgling up from the water now, clumsily sloshing its way toward us in the dark water. Nothing was going to stop the bastard, but I made my way as quickly as I could over to the post. My waders were made of rubber, so I hoped this half-baked scheme would work. As the thing got closer, I reached out, grabbing onto it, and using its own offbeat momentum to swing it around to the other side of me. It landed right on target, face first into the live wire. I felt a brief shock as my hands let go of its body, noticing smoke rising from it as it convulsed atop the post. A couple of moments passed before the wire shorted out, creature going limp against Tay post as it died. The outpost was still going up in flames around us as we both lifted the body, bringing it toward the massive pyre. It became that thing's funeral when we threw it on top, letting it burn away before it had any chance to pull some shit and come back at us. There was no sound from it, just the crackling of flames as the outpost burned, smoke rising into the sky above. Screams started coming from the clearing, this time more high-pitched than the last, but all in a terrible discordance that sounded like the choir of hell. We covered our ears, looking back to the clearing as the moonlight illuminated 3 small bodies, each one maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. One of them took to the air, massive needle mouth extending under the glowing red eyes. This fucking thing was nesting its eggs in the dead bodies, reproducing. I went back to the boat, grabbing the flare gun and a can of gasoline while Sully made his way to the small ones. They didn't put up much of a fight, thankfully, and he was able to crush them relatively easy, underfoot. We started moving every body we found, piling them in the driest place we could before dousing them in gasoline. When they were soaked, we went back to the boat, carefully aiming the flare gun at the pile through the clearing before pulling the trigger. Every body in that pile went up that night. I still don't know who all of them were, and it's likely their poor families may never get closure, but after seeing what that thing had nested in them, I think we did them a service burning the bodies. Sully and I both gave the same report, though GBI didn't seem to believe it. Every time we've talked about it since we've wondered it, it was just some freak of nature cryptid or a mutant abomination made by the pollution taking hold. My bet is on the pollution, chemicals probably getting into the mosquito spawn and making, well, these bastards. We've made it a point when any bodies come up in the swamp now to watch them for a few days, making sure they don't reproduce into more of the damn things. Despite how terrifying it could be out here, there were times when the supernatural stuff could be oddly beautiful. There's a pretty common phenomenon that I still don't really know if it's real or something more beyond Outworld, but I've seen it enough to know that it's not entirely normal. Swamp lights, small, floating torches in the dark that move of their own accord through the air. Some say they're called ball lightning. Others believe that it's some combination of gas and heat in the air. Those of us in the ranger station have realized it's something a little more than that. This was something we would see probably every other week. Just faint glows in the distance from our outpost, or even along the tree lines while we were out on patrol. There was no telling where they would turn up, but we knew if they were out there, we had some searching to do. Every time a swamp light popped up, floating above the water, it was like a beacon guiding us to something. That something was, unfortunately, usually a body of someone who got lost, or just wandered into the wrong area. They're not even terrifying, but more just sad. Every time we would see one, it was a sign to get out the nets and drag the water. Granted, that wasn't always the case, and we think some were just stray spirits left to wander, unable to move on even after their bodies were taken for burial. I think they got lonely sometimes too, just floating out there in search of someone, something, to actually acknowledge that they were once there. One night when I was out on the main station platform, I looked off into the trees to see what almost looked like Christmas lights blinking in and out, but way larger than any of the fireflies that were out here. That sent a bad feeling down my spine, hoping that I wasn't about to stumble upon a mass grave or anything. The lights were just there though, zipping over the water and, if I'm right, chasing each other in play. We dredged the area the next day, but no bodies came up. All I can assume is that they were just lost souls who finally met up with each other, finally enjoying a little company after so long searching in the dark. My last encounter was 2 years ago. Since then I've mostly retired to life as a desk jockey, taking my leave of having to wander the muck out there. It was bright out, midday, and I was out doing some land survey work to make sure local wildlife wasn't being overtaken by some invasive flora we'd had popping up. I was near one of the nicer outposts, this one with some air conditioning and a couple of amenities for anyone that needed them, when I decided to take a break for lunch. Considering fall was coming, I decided to eat my lunch out on the platform and look out at everything. Nature out here was beautiful, with every shade of green imaginable playing off the sunlight high in the sky. Think I ended up sitting there for an hour after I finished eating, just taking in the peace of it all and watching alligators float lazily along in the water beyond. I was zoning out, looking at one of the nearby tree banks a couple dozen meters away when it began walking through the background where I was staring. This thing was tall, hell, even taller than the mosquito creature, at around 12 feet by my best estimation. It was built like a 10-ton brick shithouse too. Damn thing looked like it could lift a truck if it needed to. Dark brown fur was matted up and down its body, with small, beady eyes staring out above an elongated snout. Ferocious teeth curled down out of its lip from top and bottom, saliva dripping from them. As it traversed the mud across the way, I could see sharp claws gripping trees as it hopped from bank to bank, leaving deep furrows in the bark as it went. I don't know if I made a sound or if it just smelled me, but it stopped dead in its tracks and turned, looking right at me. A howl like I've never heard before ripped through the air before it tore into the water, splashing toward me on the platform. I was up and inside so fast I shook the entire outpost when I slammed the door, and it shook the whole place again when it bashed up against it. I pulled the deadbolt and chain on the door, hoping to whatever god there was that it wouldn't break through. It kept beating at the door, terrible claws ripping at the other side trying to get in. I don't know what it wanted with me or if I was just unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The beating on the door stopped suddenly, heavy, plodding footfalls walking around the outpost platform looking for another way in. I didn't have any time to waste, staying out here as long as I had taught me that sometimes it was best to defend myself first, no matter what danger it posed to the wildlife. I ran toward the gun locker, pulling out the pump shotgun inside and loading in 2 shells before cocking it. The monster threw itself against the opposite wall from me, desperately trying to break it down to get in. I could hear the ferocious growls constantly, like a rabid dog desperately trying to bite whoever would come near enough. It was about to pass in front of the window now, and I knew I only had one chance to get this right, or I may die out here. I raised the gun to my shoulder, taking aim square at the window and holding my breath, finger on the trigger. The creature suddenly ran from the side, slamming a massive claw against the window to break it open. As it began climbing through to get me, I fired off the first shot, catching it right in the left shoulder. I pumped the gun again, pulling it back up to my throbbing shoulder. The kickback on this thing was more than I was used to, and I was going to be sore for the next damn week afterwards. It still tried coming at me again, but I fired off the second shell, quickly ejecting it and pulling more out to reload. The shot peppered the thing right in the face, blowing off some of the skin around its skull. Despite all that, eye now staring at me unable to close, and half of its mouth fixed in a wicked snarl, tears of flesh hanging from the side, it turned tail and ran off. Explaining the broken window and huge gashes on the door was surprisingly easy. We all had an understanding at this point that weird shit happens out there, and sometimes the place just needed some repairs when wildlife got uppity or bad weather happened. Most of the official expense reports mentioned bad weather, but on occasion we would have fun with them, making up random bullshit to send off to the state auditors. Not like they were going to come out here and check on it themselves. I haven't seen the damned son of a bitch since, thank God. I have heard some of the younger rangers tell tales of howling late at night and seeing a massive creature walking through the trees just beyond the shadows of what they could see. Shining a light on it only causes bright green eyes to reflect back when they see it, and that's usually all it takes for them to turn tail and run. I still work here, but like I said, I stick to the desk jobs now. The younger folk can go out and deal with all the craziness the Okefenokee has to offer. I'll stay right here in the air conditioning. In the shadow of World War II, the Germans built 6 underwater bunkers along the coast of Norway, a secretive project shielded from the prying eyes of Allied forces. These bunkers, hidden deep beneath the icy waters of the North Sea, were designed to serve as fortified command posts and supply caches, but their existence was never fully documented. Decades later, as the world moved on and the Cold War era faded into history, the bunkers were forgotten, ghosts of a bygone era, submerged and lost to time. Yet, whispers of their existence never completely disappeared. Fishermen spoke of strange lights and eerie noises from the depths, while conspiracy theorists spun tales of dark experiments and sinister occurrences beneath the waves. It was in the winter of 2024 that a group of adventurers, enticed by these eerie legends, decided to investigate. The group consisted of 4 members: Anna, a seasoned underwater archaeologist; Mark, a tech-savvy diver; Sarah, an environmental scientist; and Leo, a historian with a penchant for the macabre. They arrived at the small, remote fishing village of Alesund, Norway, under the cover of a heavy snowstorm. The village, with its quaint wooden houses and narrow streets, seemed almost untouched by time. The locals, wary and reserved, spoke in hushed tones about the old bunkers, but offered little in the way of guidance. Their plan was ambitious: to locate and explore the remaining bunkers using advanced sonar equipment and underwater drones. Armed with cutting-edge technology, they set out on a research vessel named the Aurora, its sleek frame cutting through the stormy waters with a sense of purpose. As the vessel approached the coordinates they had pinpointed, the weather worsened. The wind howled with an unnatural ferocity, and the sea churned violently as if the ocean itself were protesting their intrusion. Anna and her team felt a shiver of apprehension, but they pressed on, driven by curiosity and a sense of adventure. The sonar readings were unsettling. The data showed large, rectangular shapes on the ocean floor, signs of the old bunkers. Yet, there was something else. The readings fluctuated wildly, as if the very nature of the underwater structures was defying the technology. As night fell, the storm raged on, and the crew prepared to deploy their underwater drones. Mark, with his fingers deftly manipulating the controls, guided the drone towards the first identified structure. The drone's camera feed flickered as it descended into the murky depths. "Look at that." Sarah's voice trembled as the drone's lights illuminated the exterior of the bunker. It was partially buried in sand and coral, its metal surface scarred and rusted, but unmistakably intact. The drone entered through a gaping hole in the bunker's side, revealing a cavernous, dimly lit interior. The walls were lined with ancient equipment and faded symbols, the air inside thick with a musty, metallic smell. A chill ran through the team as the drone's lights revealed a series of long-abandoned command posts and sleeping quarters. "This place is a time capsule," Leo remarked, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and dread, "but it feels wrong." As the drone moved deeper, it stumbled upon a series of strange markings, scratches and symbols carved into the walls. Some appeared to be runes or hieroglyphs, others were more abstract, almost as if they had been made in a frenzy. Suddenly, the drone's feed cut out, plunging the screen into darkness. Mark's face turned pale as he scrambled to regain the connection. "What happened?" Anna asked urgently. "I'm not sure," Mark replied, his voice strained. "It's like the signal was blocked, something's interfering." The storm outside intensified, and the vessel rocked violently. The crew braced themselves as the wind howled like a chorus of anguished souls. Anna and her team exchanged uneasy glances. They had come seeking answers, but now it felt as though something more sinister was awakening from the depths. Unbeknownst to them, the bunker was not as abandoned as they had hoped. As the night dragged on, they decided to send in a team of divers to investigate further despite the worsening weather. Anna, Mark, Sarah, and Leo suited up and prepared to enter the icy waters. The moment they submerged, the cold water seemed to seep into their bones. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing the dilapidated bunker below. As they approached the entrance, a sudden, inexplicable pressure built up around them, and the water grew colder still. Inside, the bunker was as eerie as it had appeared on the drone's feed. The divers' movements echoed in the confined space, their breathing amplified by the surrounding silence. They moved cautiously through the corridors, their lights revealing more strange markings and deteriorated equipment. The air was stale, and the feeling of being watched was palpable. Suddenly, Sarah let out a gasp. "Look at this." The team gathered around, their lights illuminating a series of strange symbols etched into the walls. But there was something more unsettling, a series of recent footprints in the dust, as if someone or something had been there recently. A low, mournful moan echoed through the bunker, sending a chill down their spines. It was as if the bunker itself were alive, whispering secrets from a forgotten past. The divers exchanged nervous glances, but their curiosity drove them forward. As they explored deeper into the bunker, the eerie atmosphere grew more oppressive. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the shadows danced menacingly in the flickering light. The sense of dread was almost tangible. Suddenly, Leo stopped in his tracks. "Do you hear that?" The others paused, their ears straining to catch the faint sound of scraping and whispering. It was as if something, or someone, was moving just out of sight. The team moved forward cautiously, their nerves on edge. They arrived at a large chamber, its walls adorned with faded murals and symbols. At the center of the room stood a massive, rusted control panel covered in layers of grime and decay. Anna approached the panel, her flashlight illuminating the intricate symbols etched into its surface. "These markings," she said, her voice trembling. "They're not German, they're something else." As she examined the panel, the chamber's temperature dropped sharply and the air grew thick with an unnatural chill. The diver's breath turned to mist, and their movements became labored. Without warning, the control panel began to hum, and the room was bathed in a dim, flickering light. The symbols on the panel seemed to glow with an otherworldly energy, and the whispering grew louder, more urgent. The divers looked around in horror as the walls of the chamber began to shift, revealing hidden passages and dark recesses. The bunker, it seemed, was not simply a relic of the past. It was a living entity, its secrets stirring from their long slumber. The humming from the control panel grew louder, filling the chamber with an almost rhythmic vibration. The divers, their faces lit by the eerie glow of the symbols, exchanged anxious glances. The sensation of being watched intensified, and the once faint whispers became a cacophony of disjointed voices. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking with fear. "I don't know," Anna replied, her gaze fixed on the glowing symbols. "But it's like the bunker is responding to us." Leo approached the panel cautiously, his flashlight revealing more intricate carvings that seemed to writhe and shift before his eyes. The symbols appeared to move as if they were alive, coalescing into patterns that defied logic. Suddenly, the chamber's temperature plummeted further, and a cold wind blew through the room, extinguishing their flashlights. The divers struggled to relight their torches, their breaths coming out in frosty puffs. As the lights flickered back on, they saw that the murals on the walls had changed. Where there had been faded images of soldiers and machinery, there were now grotesque figures and nightmarish scenes, their eyes seeming to follow the divers with malevolent intent. Anna's hand trembled as she reached for the control panel, trying to decipher the symbols. "These markings, they're ancient, but they don't match any known language or script. It's almost as if they're a form of warning." As she spoke, a loud crash echoed through the bunker, shaking the walls. The divers flinched, their hearts pounding. The noise seemed to come from one of the hidden passages revealed by the shifting walls. Mark, ever the tech enthusiast, tried to use his equipment to get a read on their surroundings, but the devices were malfunctioning. Static filled the screens and the underwater radio was silent. "Something's interfering with our tech," he said, frustration evident in his voice. Leo's eyes were fixed on one of the murals, where a figure with hollow eyes appeared to move closer with each flicker of the light. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice urgent. "This place is messing with our equipment and our minds." Anna hesitated, her curiosity battling with her sense of self-preservation. "We're so close to uncovering what this place is hiding. I just need a little more time." Before she could finish, another loud crash reverberated through the bunker. This time, it was followed by a guttural growl that seemed to come from the depths of the structure itself. The divers' panic reached a fever pitch as they turned to see shadows moving in the corners of their vision, flickering like dark shapes against the walls. Sarah, visibly shaken, pointed towards the exit. "Anna, we need to leave now. This place isn't safe." Reluctantly, Anna agreed. The team made their way back towards the entrance, their path illuminated only by the dim light of their flashlights. The bunker seemed to resist their exit, with the walls shifting and closing off passages as they progressed. As they neared the exit, the sounds of whispering grew louder, more insistent. The voices seemed to be calling out to them, their words unintelligible but filled with a sense of urgency and despair. The cold, almost tangible, seemed to cling to their skin, making every movement a struggle. Just as they reached the entrance, the control panel let out a final, deafening hum before falling silent. The light from the symbols vanished, plunging the chamber into darkness once more. The divers scrambled out, their breaths ragged, their nerves frayed. Back on the surface, the storm had begun to subside, though the sky remained a foreboding slate of gray. The crew of the Aurora helped them aboard, their faces showing concern as they noted the divers' pale, shaken appearance. "What happened down there?" the captain asked, his voice filled with concern. Anna took a deep breath, struggling to compose herself. "We don't know. Something in that bunker. It's not just a relic of the past. It's alive, and it doesn't want to be disturbed. As the crew worked to secure the divers and prepare for departure, Anna, Mark, Sarah, and Leo huddled together, their minds racing with the implications of what they had discovered. The bunker's secrets were far from revealed, and the sense of dread they had felt was not something they could easily shake. Leo looked out over the now calming sea, his face etched with worry. If there are more bunkers like this, we have to be careful. This one was bad enough. I can't imagine what the others might hold. Sarah nodded in agreement. Whatever is in those bunkers, it's been waiting for decades. It's only a matter of time before it's disturbed again. As they made their way back to the safety of the shore, a feeling of foreboding settled over them. The sea, once a seemingly benign expanse, now felt like a dark, threatening abyss. The ancient bunkers, hidden beneath the waves, were not merely remnants of a past war. They were a gateway to something far more sinister. The journey back to Alisund was marked by an uneasy silence. The divers sat in a trance-like state, their minds haunted by the inexplicable events they had encountered in the bunker. The crew of the Aurora worked in hushed tones, their concern evident as they glanced at the group. As the vessel docked in the quiet harbor of Alisund, the first light of dawn began to pierce through the heavy clouds. The village, still blanketed in snow, appeared serene in contrast to the turmoil the team had experienced. But the calm was deceptive. Anna, Mark, Sarah, and Leo knew that the horrors they had glimpsed were far from over. The team convened in a small, dimly lit cafe near the docks, seeking refuge from the bitter cold and the relentless storm that had settled over the village. Over steaming mugs of coffee, they discussed their next steps. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," Anna said, her voice hoarse. "The symbols, the whispers, it's like something was trying to communicate with us." Leo nodded, his face pale. "And it wasn't just the bunker's equipment acting up. It felt like the very air was alive, like the place itself was reacting to our presence." Sarah shivered, even in the warmth of the cafe. Those markings weren't just random. They seemed almost conscious. And the temperature drops, the whispers, everything points to something supernatural. Mark, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "We should dig into the historical records. If these bunkers were built during the war, there might be archives or old documents that can shed light on what they were really used for." Anna agreed, her eyes reflecting determination. "That's a good idea. We'll need to get to the local archives and see if there's anything that could explain the bizarre phenomena we experienced." After breakfast, the team set out for the village's small museum and historical archives. The building was a modest structure, its exterior adorned with traditional Norwegian decor. Inside, they were greeted by an elderly archivist named Ingrid, who seemed both curious and wary of the visitors' intent. As the team explained their purpose, Ingrid's eyes widened with a mixture of concern and intrigue. "You're investigating the old bunkers. They are indeed a part of our history, though not many people speak of them. There are records, but some of them are quite peculiar." Ingrid led them to a back room filled with dusty shelves and aged documents. The team spent hours poring over old maps, military reports, and personal diaries from the war. Most of the documents were mundane, detailing routine operations and logistics. However, some stood out. Cryptic notes and hastily scribbled warnings about strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena. Anna found a particularly intriguing diary entry from a German officer stationed at one of the bunkers. The entry, dated late in the war, mentioned unsettling experiences, strange noises, inexplicable equipment failures, and a growing sense of dread among the soldiers. "It seems like the officers themselves were experiencing something unusual," Anna said, her voice laden with unease. "They were scared, and they knew something was wrong." Leo found another document detailing the construction of the bunkers. It mentioned special precautions and ancient symbols of protection. Though the language was vague and the context unclear, it looks like they were more than just military installations. They were built with an awareness of something beyond ordinary threats. As the afternoon wore on, Ingrid provided a final piece of information, a local legend about the bunkers. The legend spoke of an ancient, malevolent entity that had been sealed away long before the Germans arrived, and that the bunkers were built to contain it. The tales were dismissed by most as folklore, but Ingrid's serious demeanor suggested she took them seriously. Many in the village believe that whatever was sealed in those bunkers is still there, Ingrid said quietly, and some believe that the war was just a distraction, a cover for something much darker. The team left the archives with a heavy sense of foreboding. They had learned little about the true nature of the entities they might be dealing with, but they had uncovered enough to know that their investigation was far from over. Back at the Aurora, the storm had intensified again, the wind howling and the waves crashing against the shore with renewed fury. The team prepared for their next dive, knowing they would need to explore another bunker to understand the full extent of the menace they were confronting. The following day they set out for a second bunker, this one located further from the shore. The weather was harsh and the sea was choppy, but the team pressed on, driven by their need to uncover the truth. As they descended into the cold, dark waters, the sense of dread was palpable, each member of the team feeling the weight of their previous experience pressing down on them. The second bunker was similar in design to the first, though it was less damaged by time and the elements. The team approached with caution, their lights cutting through the murky water. As they entered the bunker, they were struck by an immediate sense of foreboding. The air was colder than before, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed even more pronounced. As they explored the bunker's interior, they found more of the strange symbols and markings. Some of the equipment appeared to be in better condition, but there was a pervasive sense of wrongness, as if the very air was thick with malevolent energy. Suddenly, the team's lights flickered, and the temperature dropped sharply. The control panel in this bunker, unlike the first, was intact and operational. The symbols on the panel glowed with an ominous light, and the low hum that emanated from it seemed almost to resonate with a deep, primal fear. Sarah's breath came out in visible puffs, and she shivered uncontrollably. "It's like it's alive," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Anna approached the control panel, trying to decipher its purpose. If the other bunkers are similar, we might be able to find a pattern or code that explains what's happening. As they worked, the shadows in the bunker seemed to move, shifting and swirling with an eerie fluidity. The whispers from the previous bunker returned, now louder and more insistent. They felt like an invisible presence was watching them, waiting for them to uncover its secrets. The divers' equipment began to malfunction again, and the oppressive cold grew even more unbearable. The bunker seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, its walls vibrating with an ominous resonance. Suddenly, one of the walls cracked open, revealing a hidden chamber behind it. The team hesitated but decided to investigate, their sense of dread outweighing their curiosity. Inside the chamber, they found a series of ancient artifacts and relics, all marked with the same disturbing symbols they had seen earlier. There was an altar at the center of the room, surrounded by strange markings and objects that seemed to defy explanation. Anna's flashlight fell on a large, ornate book resting on the altar. The book's cover was covered in dust, and its pages were yellowed with age. As she opened it, she saw that the pages were filled with more of the cryptic symbols and writings they had encountered. "What is this?" Mark asked, peering over Anna's shoulder. "I don't know," Anna replied, "but it might hold the key to understanding what's really going on here." As they examined the book, the air around them grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. The divers felt a surge of fear and unease, as if something was trying to force them out of the bunker. The presence seemed to be closing in on them, and the team knew they had to leave. They quickly gathered the artifacts and made their way back to the exit, their hearts pounding with a sense of impending doom. As they surfaced and returned to the Aurora, the storm had worsened, the waves crashing violently against the ship. The crew helped them aboard, their faces reflecting the concern and fear that mirrored the divers' own. Anna, Mark, Sarah, and Leo huddled together, their minds racing with the implications of what they had discovered. The ancient entity they had uncovered was far from dormant, and the bunkers were not merely relics of the past. They were the prison of something dark and malevolent. The team knew that their investigation was far from over. The remaining bunkers held untold secrets, and the entity that had been awakened was waiting for them. As they prepared to face the unknown, they could only hope that they would be able to uncover the truth before it was too late. The storm battered the Aurora relentlessly as the team prepared for their final dive. The ship creaked and groaned with each wave, the tension among the divers palpable. Anna, Mark, Sarah, and Leo were exhausted but resolute. They had seen enough to know that the bunkers held more than historical interest. They were the key to understanding an ancient and malevolent force. With the weather worsening, the team realized that time was running out. They planned their dive meticulously, choosing to explore the remaining bunker closest to the surface. If there was any chance of uncovering the full truth, it would be now or never. As they descended into the icy waters once more, the visibility was poor and the cold was biting. Their dive suits provided some protection, but the chilling fear from their previous encounters made every movement feel like a struggle. The ocean seemed to close in around them, the dark depths pressing in on their senses. The final bunker, unlike the others, was eerily silent. Its exterior, partially covered in seaweed and marine growth, was less damaged but bore a foreboding presence. The team approached cautiously, their lights cutting through the darkness, revealing an entrance similar to the others they had explored. Inside, the bunker was unusually pristine. The air was still and heavy, and the silence was almost oppressive. The walls were lined with more of the strange symbols and markings they had seen before, but this time, they seemed more detailed, almost as if they were telling a story. Anna, with her flashlight, illuminated a large central chamber, its walls covered with elaborate murals depicting scenes of ancient rituals and battles. At the center of the chamber stood a massive stone altar covered in dust and cobwebs. The altar was adorned with symbols and strange artifacts, some of which matched those they had seen in the other bunkers. As they examined the chamber, Sarah discovered an ancient ornate box hidden beneath the altar. It was intricately decorated with symbols and seemed to pulse with an almost imperceptible energy. The team carefully opened the box, revealing a collection of ancient scrolls and relics. Leo, his hands trembling, began to unroll one of the scrolls. The text was written in an ancient script that was both familiar and alien. It spoke of an entity known as the Bound One, a being of immense power that had been imprisoned in the depths long before the bunkers were constructed. According to the scrolls, the Bound One was a dark force that thrived on fear and despair. It was said to have been sealed away by ancient protectors using powerful symbols and rituals. The bunkers, constructed by the Germans, were built over the site of this ancient prison to ensure that the entity remained contained. "This confirms everything," Anna said, her voice trembling. The bunkers were never just military installations. They were built to contain something far more dangerous. The team continued to explore the chamber, their nerves on edge. As they moved, the air grew colder, and the oppressive silence was broken by the faint sound of distant whispers. It was as if the Bound One was aware of their presence and was trying to reach out to them. Suddenly, the chamber's temperature dropped sharply, and a low, rumbling growl echoed through the bunker. The divers' lights flickered, and the walls seemed to tremble with a dark energy. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the sense of dread became almost unbearable. Anna and her team knew they had to act quickly. They gathered the scrolls and relics, hoping to find a way to reinforce the ancient seals and prevent the entity from escaping. As they worked, the growling grew louder and the walls began to crack and shift, as if reacting to their intrusion. Mark worked frantically with his equipment, trying to stabilize the signals and prevent further interference. "We need to finish this quickly," he said, his voice strained. "The entity is reacting to us." As the team completed their preparations, they felt a sudden, intense pressure, as if the very air was being squeezed out of their lungs. The walls of the chamber cracked open, revealing a hidden passage leading deeper into the bunker. The divers hesitated, but knew they had no choice. They followed the passage, their lights revealing a final, hidden chamber. At its center stood an ancient, intricate seal, covered in the same symbols they had seen throughout the bunkers. The seal was glowing with a faint, eerie light, and the air around it was thick with a palpable sense of malevolence. Anna, with shaking hands, carefully placed the relics and scrolls around the seal, using the symbols to reinforce the ancient protections. As she worked, the growling intensified, and the whispers became a chaotic roar. The chamber seemed to pulse with dark energy, and the team felt an overwhelming sense of fear. Finally, the seal was completed, and the energy in the chamber began to stabilize. The growling and whispers faded, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly. The divers, exhausted and shaken, knew that they had done what they could to contain the entity. With their task complete, they made their way back to the surface, their nerves frayed, but their mission accomplished. As they emerged from the water, the storm had abated and the sea was eerily calm. The team felt a profound sense of relief, knowing that they had prevented something truly horrific from escaping. Back on the shore, as they prepared to leave Allison, Anna and her team reflected on their harrowing experience. They had uncovered the truth about the ancient bunkers and the dark force they had contained, but the knowledge came with a heavy price. The bunkers, once forgotten relics of a past war, had revealed their true nature as prisons for a malevolent entity. The team knew that their discovery was only the beginning, and that the secrets of the underwater bunkers would continue to haunt their dreams. As they sailed away from the remote village, the sea stretched out before them, its surface now calm and serene. But beneath the waves, the ancient entity remained imprisoned, its dark presence a reminder of the dangers that lay hidden in the depths. Anna, Mark, Sarah, and Leo knew that their lives had been forever changed by their encounter with the unknown. The bunkers were no longer just historical artifacts. They were a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of the world. And as they looked out over the tranquil sea, they couldn't shake the feeling that, deep down, something was still watching, waiting for the day when it might be freed from its ancient prison. The village of Alisund returned to its quiet existence, its people unaware of the horrors that had been uncovered beneath the waves. The storm had passed, and the sea returned to its usual calm, but the memory of the underwater bunkers lingered in the minds of those who had ventured into their depths. In the quiet of the night, the ocean held its secrets close. The bunkers, now sealed once more, remained as silent sentinels beneath the waves. The dark force contained within them slumbered, its whispers fading into the depths, waiting for the day when it might be disturbed again. And as the world moved on, the legend of the ancient bunkers and the dark entity they contained would become a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers that lay hidden in the unknown. The sea, with its dark, unfathomable depths, would continue to guard its secrets, its watchful gaze ever vigilant.